There was a time when the name Radaki meant something simple, something pure. He was not a legend then, not a warrior, not even a Jedi Knight. Just a boy in white robes, quietly meditating beneath the skylight of the Jedi Temple. While others talked, he listened. While others questioned, he obeyed. And when he failed, he bowed his head and tried again. He was the kind of child who made others calmer simply by being near them. Even the teachers noticed. They didn't call him gifted, not in the way they meant for others, but they called him steady. And in a galaxy that refused to stay still, that meant something. Radaki never craved attention. He didn't hunger for praise. But when the younglings sparred, they lined up behind him, without needing to be told. When the trials grew difficult, they watched him to know how to feel. They didn't follow his orders. They followed his rhythm. Because Radaki had something the others didn't. Peace. He was chosen as a Padawan earlier than most assigned to Master Sir Falun, an old warrior who had long since tired of battle. Falun didn't train with pride. He trained with clarity. And he taught Radaki something most Jedi never learn until it's too late. That a lightsaber was not a weapon. It was a promise. To stand between the innocent and the fire. To bring order to chaos without becoming it. To act with control, even when the blood ran hot. Radaki listened, and when he fought, he didn't fight with anger. He fought with stillness. And when he spoke, even his enemies paused to hear him. By the time he was a knight, his name already carried weight in the temple halls. Not because he had power, but because he never misused it. He was the Jedi others asked for in times of doubt. The one they trusted to lead a broken mission. The one who kept his calm when the enemy didn't. He didn't just follow the code. He made others believe in it. But the galaxy was not kind to believers. And Radaki would soon learn that the code only held its shape in places untouched by war. He was assigned to the Outer Rim, where peace was just a rumor. The new Sith wars had reached their bloodiest years. Planets turned to ash. Systems vanished from the maps. Whole fleets blinked out without warning. It was the kind of war that didn't ask if you were ready. And Radaki didn't flinch. He boarded the transports, stood beside battle-hardened Jedi who no longer remembered the temple gardens, fought under skies lit by endless fire. He believed he was prepared, but no training could prepare him for what war did to the soul. The first time he saw a Jedi kill an unarmed man, he froze. The second time, he rationalized it. The third time, he looked away. And by the fourth, he had stopped counting. Radaki didn't know it yet, but something had already changed in him. Not in his technique, not in his form, but in his silence. He still gave orders, still protected his troops, still quoted the code when younglings asked him why they fought. But alone, in the hours between battles, he began to wonder if the war was killing more than just bodies. If it was killing what made Jedi, Jedi. He didn't speak those doubts. Not yet. He only carried them, quietly, like a secret wound beneath his robes. The Order still saw him as a model knight, calm, loyal, unshaken. But Radaki knew the truth. He wasn't unshaken. He was starting to shake. On the inside. And one day, the cracks would be too deep to hide. The Outer Rim did not welcome Jedi with hope. It greeted them with fire. When Radaki arrived on Malrev 4, the war had already carved scars across the land. Forests burned without sound. Villages were nothing more than blackened outlines. The air tasted of metal and ash, as if the planet itself had been breathing war for generations. Radaki stepped off the transport and felt something heavy in the force. Not darkness, not fear. Exhaustion. The people were tired. The soldiers were tired. Even the Jedi leading the front lines were tired. The kind of tired no sleep could cure. Radaki tightened his cloak and walked forward. This was where his real life as a Jedi Knight began. He fought beside masters who no longer remembered peace. He defended troops who barely remembered what they were fighting for. And every day, the Sith pushed harder. Their armies were not disciplined. They were desperate, and desperation made them unpredictable. Radaki adapted quickly. He became the calm point in every storm, the one others looked to when orders broke down. His blade moved with precision, not hate. His voice carried steady confidence through smoke and chaos. But even steady voices tremble when the truth becomes too clear. On Malriv, Radaki saw something that stayed with him for the rest of his life. A Sith warband surrendered disarmed, beaten, incapable of fighting. Yet a senior Jedi ordered their execution. "We do not have the resources for prisoners," the Master said. Radaki stepped between the prisoners and the firing line. "These men are unarmed." "They are Sith," the Master replied. Radaki stared at him, waiting for the code to matter. It didn't. He saved the prisoners anyway. But the Jedi kept marching, as if compassion were a mistake. That moment was the first crack. Boz pity came next. A world already drowning in tragedy. The Sith unleashed a massive ground assault, and Radaki led a battalion of Republic troops through trenches filled with mud and smoke. Blast of fire shredded the air. The ground shook with every impact. Radaki moved like a steady flame, guiding soldiers forward when everything around them fell apart. By nightfall, they had secured a temporary perimeter. Bodies lay in long lines, Republic, Sith, civilians who never had a chance. Medics worked in silence. Jedi stood apart, their faces blank. Radaki knelt beside a dying soldier. The man grabbed his wrist. "Why did they leave us there?" he whispered. Radaki didn't answer. Because he didn't know. As weeks passed, Radaki became known for his leadership in hopeless situations. Entire companies formed around him. They trusted his voice, not because of the order, but because he stayed with them when others retreated. But with each mission, he saw more of the war's truth. The Sith were not monsters in every case. Many were conscripts, manipulated, afraid. Some were barely more than children holding weapons too heavy for their arms. And the Jedi were not saints. Radaki saw them make cold decisions, efficient ones. Decisions meant to end battles quickly, even if innocents were caught in the crossfire. War did not care about codes. War cared about survival. One evening, after securing a ridge above the Golrun Valley, Radaki stood alone and watched the sunset bleed into smoke. He felt the Force swirl with the weight of unspoken questions. For the first time, he wondered if the Jedi were protecting life or simply choosing which lives mattered. In that moment, the wind carried the distant echo of soldiers preparing for another march, another attack, another night without peace. Radaki closed his eyes. He knew he would follow them, but he also knew something inside him had begun to shift. A slow, quiet turning toward a truth he did not yet understand. The front lines were shaping him, not into a hero, but into something the Jedi were not prepared to face. The Sith wore armor, the Jedi wore robes, but in the blood and fire of the war, those distinctions began to blur. Radaki had once believed in the code with the devotion of a child. He believed in the council, in the Order's wisdom, in the calm logic that said peace must be defended at any cost. But peace had a strange face on the battlefield. And sometimes that face looked like a Jedi. He saw it first in small things. A Jedi Knight giving false intelligence to lure civilians away from suspected Sith spies. A master who used a mind trick not to save lives but to force obedience from a local governor. Jedi squads who cut off water supplies to entire villages because the risk was too high. And they called it necessity. They called it victory. But Radaki saw something else behind their eyes. Fear. Not the wild, reckless fear of the Sith. A colder fear. One that hid behind logic and protocol. One that refused to admit the Order was losing control. At times, he wanted to speak, to challenge the masters directly. But Radaki had already begun to understand how the Order worked. Jedi did not correct Jedi in public, especially not those on the Council, especially not during war. So he watched in silence, and that silence began to cost him. He led a defensive effort on Valata too. A Republic outpost had been ambushed by Sith alchemists, their soldiers mutated by forbidden rituals. Radaki's forces were outnumbered and unprepared, but he held the line for 7 days, losing half his command in the process. When reinforcements arrived, they congratulated him, but the first thing they did was torch the remains of the enemy. Men, beasts, wounded prisoners, burned without question, without mercy. Radaki didn't speak. He just walked among the flames and felt the force recoil. It didn't matter what side had won. Something had been lost, something sacred. And he couldn't pretend not to feel it. He began writing longer mission reports, slipping concerns into his briefings, questioning patterns, raising ethical flags. But the Council's responses were cold and brief. Stay the course, Knight Radaki. The Order has confidence in your decisions. There is no emotion. There is peace. It was not peace he felt. It was numbness. And numbness was dangerous. Because it didn't scream when something was wrong. It whispered that everything was fine. He found himself lying awake between missions, remembering the faces of prisoners, the looks of villagers who had no one left to blame, the sound of Jedi voices justifying the unjustifiable, and he remembered the words of Master Falun. A lightsaber is not power. It is a promise. Radaki still carried that saber. But the promise had been broken too many times. On Calandus, the final moment came. A squad of Republic commandos opened fire on a civilian convoy suspected of sheltering Sith agents. Radaki arrived too late to stop it. When he reported the massacre, the local Jedi command dismissed the event as a necessary security measure. He pressed the issue. They told him to drop it. He didn't. So, they removed him from the sector. Not punished, not exiled. Just reassigned. Silenced. That night, Radaki sat alone in the darkness of his transport cabin. The stars outside stretched across hyperspace like silent accusations. He stared at the floor for a long time, and for the first time, since he was a child, he allowed himself to ask a forbidden question. What if we're not the good ones? The thought didn't feel evil. It felt honest, and honesty, in that moment, felt more sacred than the code. They called him back to Coruscant. Not to punish him, to promote him. Radaki was granted the rank of Jedi Master. The Council praised his clarity of judgment and extraordinary service during the Outer Rim campaigns. They spoke of balance, courage, and peace, the same words they'd always used. The same words that no longer meant what they once did. He stood in the High Council chamber, robes pristine, eyes steady, and he said nothing. He accepted the rank, bowed, offered thanks. But inside, something was missing. The war had not made him bitter, it had made him honest. And the truth was simple. He no longer believed in the version of the Jedi the Order believed in. He had seen too much. He returned to the temple, not as a student, not as a knight, but as a teacher. The younglings bowed when he entered. His name was spoken with admiration. His presence carried weight, but he felt like a ghost. He taught lightsaber forms with precision, quoted the code with calm certainty, assigned meditation exercises, evaluated sparring routines, attended council briefings. And yet, every night, he walked the temple corridors alone, silent, unseen. He often visited the archives, not to read, but to remember, to sit in the quiet chambers and ask himself why the Force felt so distant. He wasn't angry. He wasn't lost. He was hollow. One evening, a youngling approached him in the gardens. The child asked why Jedi couldn't use the dark side to help the Republic win faster. Radaki paused. The code dictated a clear answer, one he had spoken 1,000 times before. But this time, he hesitated. And then, softly, he said, "Because the dark side doesn't want to help. It wants to change you." The child didn't understand, and Radaki didn't explain. Because part of him no longer believed that answer was complete. The dark side corrupted. That much was true. But what if the light abandoned? What if the code was not a shield, but a mask? He sat alone that night, high above the skylights, staring out over the endless city. Coruscant buzzed with life, unaware of the quiet war happening within its own temple. The war inside him. He still lit his saber every morning, still wore the robes, still said the words. But something inside him had begun to split. He remembered Boz Pitti, the dying soldier, the silence after the smoke cleared, the feeling of the Force recoiling from what had been done. He remembered Valata, the prisoners burned. He remembered Kalandis. He remembered everything, and he knew that no ceremony, no promotion, no praise could undo it. He was a master in name, but inside he was a wound, one that the light could not heal. And though no one saw it yet, the path beneath him had already begun to turn, not toward rage, not toward power, but toward clarity, the kind that comes when illusions fall away, the kind that cannot be reversed. Radaki would remain in the temple for another year, teaching, serving, pretending, but the war had already taken something from him, and in its place something else was growing. Not darkness, conviction, not hatred, truth. And one day, when the Order pushed him too far, when mercy demanded defiance, and defiance was punished, he would not stay. He would leave behind the temple, the code, and the name Radaki itself. And the galaxy would never be the same. The war had never ended, it only changed locations. Radaki stood on the bridge of the Serenity's Light, a Republic cruiser bound for the Sith-controlled sectors of the Mid-Rim. His new orders were simple: assist the reclamation of Taros 6, secure the system, neutralize all resistance. He read the mission details twice. Nowhere in them was the word peace. The cruiser dropped from hyperspace into a graveyard. Starships drifted through orbit like broken bones. Republic and Sith wreckage scattered across the vacuum, tangled, silent, lifeless. But the planet below was very much alive. Fires burned across the cities. Troop carriers flooded down into combat zones. Jedi Command had deemed the world strategically critical. Radaki only saw another battlefield. He led the first wave through the city's southern quadrant. The Sith resistance was brutal, more organized than intelligence had predicted. trapdoors, choke points, mines disguised as wreckage. Radaki's unit lost 7 men before reaching their first objective. And yet, this was routine now. The war didn't offer shock anymore, only exhaustion. By the 3rd night, the civilian quarter had been secured. Radaki walked through crumbling homes filled with frightened families, some too weak to stand, some too angry to speak. He offered food and silence. They offered stares. To them, he was just another invader with a glowing blade. Later that evening, he met with Jedi Command. They recommended a sweep of the lower sectors. Purge remaining resistance, the Master said. No time to process refugees. Clear the space. Radaki asked if they'd found any armed fighters in that zone. No, came the answer. But they will fight, if we wait long enough. He stared across the holomap. That was the logic now. Kill first, justify later. They called it necessary. He called it familiar. The mission proceeded. Civilian shelters were cleared. Suspected sympathizers were detained. Some were never heard from again. Radaki did not lead those teams. He volunteered instead to extract wounded from the lower ruins. It was the only thing that still made sense. In the dark, flooded ruins of a medical center, he found a boy no older than 12 clutching a broken data chip. His hands were burned. His voice barely a whisper. "My mother told me to wait," he said. "She's coming back." Radaki scanned the ruins. There was no one else. He wrapped the boy in his cloak and carried him through smoke and falling walls, back to safety. Later, Jedi officers told him the child was under observation. Radaki never saw him again. Taros 6 was declared secure within 3 weeks. The council praised the operation, but Radaki didn't return to Coruscant. He stayed behind to oversee local recovery efforts. Not because he was assigned, because he couldn't walk away. He helped rebuild shelter domes, organized food lines, monitored the planetary shield arrays. Anything to stay useful, anything to stay human. But every day, fewer people looked him in the eye. He didn't blame them. When the final transports arrived to redeploy Republic forces to a new front, Radaki remained quiet. The Jedi had won the ground, but he didn't feel like a victor. He felt like a shadow, the kind that war leaves behind long after the fire goes out. He stood alone at dusk, watching the last carrier disappear into the sky. He closed his eyes. The Force was silent, and in that silence, a thought came to him. The war wasn't something you fought. It was something you became. They told him to take command of a new unit. Fresh Jedi, new troops, another campaign. Radaki boarded the transport without a word. The moment his boots hit the ground, he knew this world would be no different. Duramek was a mining moon, not strategic, not fortified, but it held kyber veins deep beneath its crust. The Sith had used it as a supply chain. The Republic wanted it severed. The Jedi wanted it erased. Radaki met with command under the collapsed framework of a drilling station. The air was thick with fuel vapor and static. The planet's core trembled with every seismic pulse. His orders were clear. Drive out all remaining forces. Eliminate collaborators. Secure the kyber. He asked if civilians were still present. The officer shrugged. If they're helping the Sith, they're not civilians. Radaki didn't argue, but he didn't forget that answer. The assault began at sunrise. The resistance was light. A few emplacements, scattered fighters. Many of them were injured. Some barely stood. Within hours, Duramek's control centers were captured. Radaki requested time to assess civilian presence. It was denied. The Jedi commander issued the next phase, sterilization. That was the word used. Sterilize the tunnels, seal the mines, destroy all traces of enemy infrastructure. Radaki went alone into the northern caverns before the charges were placed. He told no one. What he found didn't belong in a war report. Dozens of families, miners, children, old men who'd hidden their lights when the shooting started. No weapons, no banners, no fight. They were just waiting. He knelt among them, offered them food. One of the elders recognized his robes and turned away. "You're the ones who bring the fire," she said. Radaki didn't answer. He guided them out, all of them, marched them through the tunnels under cover of darkness, brought them to the evac freighter before command could intervene. He filed no report. He just watched them leave, wondering if they'd ever know how close they'd come to death. The next day, the caverns were destroyed. From orbit, it looked like victory. But Radaki knew better. He knew how close the Jedi had come to crossing another line, or maybe they already had. And no one had blinked. Compassion wasn't forbidden. It was forgotten. In the weeks that followed, Radaki made contact with other Jedi who had doubts. Not many, just a few. He spoke softly, carefully. He listened more than he spoke. And each time he heard the same thing. They didn't know where the line was anymore. One master confessed that he'd used the dark side in battle just once to end a siege and save lives. But the power still echoed in him, and he didn't know how to let go. Another had executed a Republic officer for insubordination, claimed it was necessary. Radaki asked if he'd felt peace afterward. The master didn't reply. The war was not ending. It was spreading into the hearts of those sworn to end it. Radaki began keeping a journal. Not with names, not with facts, with feelings, moments that didn't fit the mission reports, eyes that haunted him, silences that hurt more than blaster fire. He wrote because the order had no place for doubt. But doubt was all he had left. He still carried his saber, still wore the robes, still called himself Jedi. But every time he looked in the mirror, he saw someone else staring back. Someone who was learning that survival came at a cost. And the more he tried to protect the innocent, the more he realized they were always the first to be lost. It was supposed to be a recovery mission. A downed Jedi transport. No signal, no survivors confirmed. Radaki was sent with a small infiltration team, just 6 soldiers, 1 scout, no backup. The crash site was deep inside Sith territory, a volcanic region on the edge of the Corys system, high winds. No comms, no support. He didn't hesitate. They landed under cover of night. The valley was silent. No movement, no beacons. But the force was heavy, not dark, just burdened. Like the world itself was tired. They found the wreckage by sunrise. The transport had been split in 2, scorch marks from turbolasers. No bodies in the cockpit, no gear, no blood. Just robes, folded neatly by the fire, and footprints, leading away. Radaki followed them. They led into the cliffs through narrow rock passes and sulfur vents that made every breath burn. The team moved in silence, blasters ready, eyes scanning every shadow. They didn't see the trap until it was too late. A cave collapsed behind them. Thermal charges. The scout was killed instantly. 2 more wounded. Sith soldiers emerged from the mists, not in armor, not roaring. Calm, silent, surgical. Radaki ignited his blade. The battle lasted only minutes. But something strange happened. The Sith didn't kill the wounded. They stabilized them. bound their injuries, took their weapons, and then, without warning, stopped fighting. Their leader, a woman in crimson robes, stepped forward. Her saber was sheathed. She didn't bow, didn't threaten. She simply asked, "Why are you here?" Radaki told her. Truthfully, she listened, no mockery, no anger. When he finished, she asked if he wanted to see the survivor. He said yes. She led him alone into the caves, past her soldiers, all watching, all silent, no chains, no weapons. And there, in the shadows, was a Jedi Knight, alive, but not whole. His eyes were distant, his arm was gone. He spoke in broken phrases, his mind unraveling. "They didn't hurt me," he said. "They fed me. Let me rest." Radaki didn't understand. The Sith were supposed to torture, but these didn't. He turned to the Sith commander. "Why?" Her answer was simple. "Because we're not what you think." They gave Radaki 3 hours. To rest, to question, to speak with their soldiers. He did. And what he found was not peace, but recognition. These Sith were not monsters. They were once Jedi, exiles, survivors. They had stories, losses, regrets. They believed the Republic had abandoned them, that the Order had become an empire of light, one that burned too brightly to see its own shadow. Radaki didn't argue. He just listened. When the Republic reinforcements arrived, the cave was empty. The Sith had vanished. No trace, no footprints, no presence. Only the wounded Jedi, now stabilized and recovering. And Radaki's team alive, confused, quiet. The council debriefed him for hours. He told the truth, every word. They redacted the report, classified the mission, buried the details under combat trauma and field stress. Radaki was never sent into enemy territory alone again. But the experience stayed with him. Because now, he didn't see the war in black and white. He saw faces, voices. He saw a woman who spared his life, soldiers who showed restraint, and a Jedi who had been saved not by the Order but by those they called enemies. The Force had not screamed in those caves. It had whispered, and in that whisper, Radaki had heard something he would never forget. The dark side wasn't always cruel, and the light wasn't always kind. The war did not stop. It only moved to another planet, another system, another sky. Radaki no longer remembered the names of every battlefield. They blurred together jungles, ruins, spaceports, monasteries, all haunted by smoke, all echoing with the same words. Victory, liberation, peace. But the peace they spoke of never came. After the mission on Koris, Radaki was reassigned to Selene Prime, a stronghold for Sith intelligence. The planet was taken in less than a week. Its leadership was executed within hours of capture. The Jedi didn't watch. They looked away. Radaki didn't. He stood outside the command tent and listened as a Republic colonel signed the death orders, one name at a time. Men, women, even low-level scribes, all labeled as enemy combatants. When Radaki protested, the colonel simply said, "Peace requires hard choices." He'd heard that before, so many times that it no longer felt like justification. It felt like permission. The Jedi Council sent a message the next day. A simple briefing, commendations, praise for mission clarity. They did not mention the executions. They did not ask what Radaki had seen. He walked through the city alone that night. The people were quiet, not grateful, not angry, just afraid. He saw children peeking through broken shutters, Parents clutching ration bags like they were sacred relics. This was peace. This was what they were fighting for. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Because deep inside, he already knew the answer. They weren't fighting for peace. They were fighting to end opposition. And calling it peace, Radaki began to withdraw. Not in duty, he still served, still led missions, still gave orders. But something in his voice had changed. The troops obeyed him, but they didn't follow him the way they used to. Some whispered that he was too soft, others said he was tired. One young knight asked him, plainly, "Do you still believe in this war?" Radaki didn't answer, because the question wasn't fair. It wasn't the war he doubted. It was what the Jedi were becoming inside it. He watched a group of younglings spar in a temple hangar. Their stances were perfect, their minds sharp. They fought without anger, without mercy. He realized they were learning all the wrong things. Not because their masters were corrupt, but because the war had changed the curriculum, changed the teachers, changed the lessons. The dark side had not crept in like a shadow. It had arrived wearing robes, carrying codes, speaking softly. The Jedi hadn't fallen. They had adapted. And in that adaptation, something essential had been lost. Radaki returned to his quarters that evening, opened his journal, and wrote only one sentence. Peace is just control by another name. He stared at the words for a long time. Then he closed the journal. He didn't burn it, didn't hide it. He simply placed it on his desk and turned off the lights. He sat in silence, letting the hum of Coruscant traffic fade into the walls, letting the Force speak or try to. But the Force no longer whispered. It watched. And Radaki understood. The Jedi didn't need warriors anymore. They needed believers. And he was no longer one of them. Not truly. He still served, still obeyed, still tried to protect. But part of him had already left. And that part was not coming back. The briefing was short. The mission, simple. A separatist colony in the outer districts of Baldemnik had refused Jedi inspection. Intelligence suggested they were harboring Sith agents. The Council issued a Level 3 purge directive, no survivors, no records. Radaki read the order twice, then a third time. The language was cold, not cruel, not angry, just efficient. He asked for clarification. A master on the comm said, "You're not being asked to judge them. Just remove the threat." Radaki didn't answer. He gathered his unit, boarded the dropship, reviewed terrain schematics. But when the doors opened and he saw the colony for himself, the mission stopped making sense. They weren't warriors. They weren't Sith. They were farmers, engineers, teachers. Some wore old Republic insignia. Most didn't wear anything at all. Just threadbare clothes and tired eyes. There were children. Too many children. Radaki stepped forward, saber at his side, and asked to speak with the settlement leader. A woman emerged, no guards, no fear, no weapons, just calm. She told him what he already knew. They weren't enemies. They were survivors. They had fled the war, fled both sides, refused to fight, refused to serve. They'd chosen silence. And silence, to the Jedi, was now treason. He opened a private channel to the fleet commander, requested delay, revaluation. The reply was swift. Execute the order. You're out of time. Radaki stood in the middle of the village square. His troops watched him, waiting. Some had hands on their weapons. One of them asked, "Sir, are we engaging?" Radaki looked at the families, then at his soldiers, and said one word, "No." Minus. He powered down his saber, ordered the troops to stand down, radioed command, and reported the colony as neutralized, no threat detected. It was a lie, but a peaceful one. He stayed with the colony overnight, helped repair their shield array, sat with their elders, ate their food. He did not speak of the war. He just listened, and when he left in silence. The council summoned him 3 days later. They didn't call it a trial, but it felt like one. 4 masters, 1 holo recorder, no audience. They read his reports, reviewed his command logs, asked only one question. Why did you disobey? Radaki said nothing at first. Then, quietly, he told the truth. They weren't the enemy. A pause, then a reply. The enemy is not always visible. He shook his head. They were not the enemy. The council didn't shout. They didn't accuse. They just decided. He would be removed from combat command, relieved of his front-line authority, reassigned, not punished, displaced. When he bowed and turned to leave, one master spoke behind him. You're not being cast out. You're being protected from yourself. He didn't look back, because he knew what that meant. The Jedi no longer trusted him, not because he was wrong, but because he had chosen mercy over protocol. The next day, his orders arrived. He was to depart for a remote sanctuary on the moon, called Derathos, a relic outpost once used for quiet study and isolation. No assignments, no students, no purpose, just silence. The last thing he packed was his saber, not because he needed it, but because he didn't know who he was without it. And as the shuttle lifted from Coruscant's surface, Radaki stared out the viewport at the golden skyline one last time. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a place he used to believe in. Derathos was not on most star charts. A frozen moon orbiting a dead gas giant. No cities, no ships, just stone cliffs and ice storms that never stopped screaming. The outpost was older than most Jedi remembered, built during the Great Peace before the Sith returned. It had no garrison, no defenses, no holonet link, only empty corridors and silence. Radaki arrived alone. No escort, no welcome, just a locked door and an access code. The air inside was stale, the walls cracked. Meditation chambers lay buried in dust, scrolls untouched. Light barely reached the inner halls. It was not exile, but it wasn't sanctuary either. It was forgetting. He didn't speak for days. He unpacked slowly, cleaned one chamber, lit one candle, Saturday, and waited for the Force to say something. It didn't. The stillness was different from the temple. At Coruscant, silence had structure. Here, it had weight. The kind that pressed on your chest when you breathed. The kind that asked questions without words. Radaki wandered the outpost in the mornings, studied the stonework, read the old inscriptions, ancient teachings from a time before codes and councils. The Force is not obedience. It is listening. Let go of light, let go of dark, find the thread between. He read that one twice, then a third time. At night, he meditated, not to calm himself, to remember who he was. But memory was not his friend. It brought faces, orders, fires, and silence. Weeks passed. The food ran low. A supply droid landed twice a month. It never spoke, just dropped crates and flew away. Radaki stopped speaking, too. He stopped expecting messages, updates, redemption. No one came, not even the Jedi. especially not the Jedi. They had made their decision, and he had obeyed, not with rage, but with surrender. He didn't train, didn't teach, he only listened, to the wind howling across the cliffs, to the cracks in the stone, to the Force, and slowly it began to answer, not with visions, not with commands, but with questions. Why do you still wear the robes? Who are you protecting now? What did you expect mercy to cost? The questions came like drops of water in a cave, soft, relentless, and Radaki had no answer for them. He still ignited his saber each night before sleeping, not to fight, to remind himself it was real, that he was real. But even the hum of the blade felt quieter here, not weaker, just distant. One evening he found a broken holorecorder in a sealed chamber. It played fragments from Jedi long forgotten. Reflections, regrets, warnings. One voice whispered, "The Order sees itself as light, but the sun casts the longest shadows." Another said, "Do not wait for the dark side to corrupt you. Ask whether the light has already done it." Radaki sat in that room for hours, not to learn, but to mourn. He mourned the part of him that still waited for the Council to understand, the part that wanted to be called back, to be told he was right, that mercy had a place in war. But no message came, no voice, no apology. Only the wind, and somewhere deep in that silence, something began to shift. The Force no longer felt distant. It felt patient, not cruel, not comforting, just present. And for the first time in years, Radaki wondered if the Force had been watching all along, not judging, not saving, just waiting. For him to stop serving what others called light, and start listening for what the light could no longer say. The Force had always been quiet, but now it was something else. It waited. Radaki felt it in the stillness between his thoughts, not as light, not as darkness, but as presence, like an ancient breath behind every stone. It didn't reach for him. It let him come closer, and when he did, it did not reward him with visions or power. It gave him questions, the same ones he had buried. What is a Jedi who refuses to kill? What is a master who disobeys the Council? What is left when the robes no longer fit? He tried to answer, but the words never came. Not because he didn't know, because deep down, he did, and he wasn't ready to admit it. One night, during a storm, the power grid failed. The outpost lights died. The holopanels froze. The outer doors sealed under protocol. Radaki lit a single torch and walked through the black holes. Not searching, just moving. The Force followed, not guiding, not protecting, just watching. At the heart of the compound, beneath the oldest stone, he found a stairwell he'd never noticed, half buried, unmarked. He descended in silence. No Jedi had walked there in centuries. But the air remembered. The chamber below was small, round. No furniture, no consoles. Just walls, carved with phrases the Jedi no longer taught. Balance is not obedience. Compassion is not weakness. The Force does not belong to the Order. Radaki ran his fingers over the inscriptions, and then he heard it. Not a voice, not in words, a presence, old, deep, calm, not the dark side, something beneath it. It didn't call itself anything. It didn't need to, but it felt familiar, not like the Jedi he had trained with, like the ones the Jedi had tried to forget. He didn't ignite his saber. He just listened, and the presence asked only one question. Why are you still afraid to change? Radaki didn't answer. He just sat, and for the first time, he didn't reach outward for the Force. He let it come to him, not to grant power, to show him what he already knew. He remembered the colony he refused to destroy. He remembered the prisoners who begged for water. He remembered the child who never spoke again. And he remembered the council's silence. None of those memories made him angry. They made him clear. He saw now that the Jedi did not fear the dark. They feared uncertainty. They built walls against emotion, against doubt, against anything they could not name. And when Radaki stepped outside those walls, they didn't try to stop him. They just closed the door behind him. The presence did not promise vengeance. It didn't whisper promises. It just waited for him to decide. And Radaki understood something he hadn't before. He wasn't being tempted. He was being asked, not by darkness, by truth. He stood in that chamber for a long time. No blade in hand, no code to recite, only the sound of his own breath, and the knowledge that the Force was not the order. It never had been. It never would be. He left the chamber with nothing in his hands, but more clarity than he'd ever known. The stars above Darathos looked the same that night, but Radaki didn't. Because something inside him had shifted, not broken, unveiled, and what it revealed was not a Sith. Not yet, but not a Jedi either. Just a man, listening for the truth beneath the silence, and starting to hear it speak back. He did not plan to return to Coruscant, but the summons came without warning, a simple message carried by an old courier droid. No apology, no explanation, only a request. Report to the High Council. Urgent. Radaki stared at the message for a long time. Part of him believed this was the moment he would be forgiven. The moment someone would say the council had reconsidered, that mercy was not failure, that compassion was not betrayal. He boarded the transport anyway, not out of hope, out of habit. Coruscant looked the same as when he left, golden towers rising through fog, endless traffic humming like an artificial heartbeat. But it did not feel the same. It felt smaller, as if he had grown beyond the walls that once defined him. When he stepped into the temple, no one greeted him. No students stared in awe. No knights nodded in respect. He was invisible. A ghost walking through the place he once called home. The council chamber doors opened slowly. 12 masters, 12 calm faces, 12 people who had judged him without ever truly listening. They told him to stand in the center. He didn't bow. One master began to speak. Your behavior on Baldemnik shows instability. You disobeyed a direct order. You are not fit for command. Radaki said nothing. Another master continued. Your isolation has created emotional disturbance. The force around you is unclear, unsteady. Again, he stayed silent. He already knew this was not a hearing. It was a verdict. A third master leaned forward. You are no longer aligned with the Order's needs. We cannot trust your judgment. Radaki looked at them, at the people he had served, defended, bled for. He finally spoke. Did any of you ask what happened on that moon? The chamber fell quiet. No one answered. So, he continued, did any of you read the names of the people you ordered me to kill? Still, silence. Did any of you ask why a Jedi Knight had to choose compassion alone? Their expressions didn't change. Their robes didn't move. Their eyes didn't soften. One master finally replied, you allowed emotion to cloud your discipline. Radaki almost laughed. Not out of disrespect, out of disbelief. Emotion had not clouded him. It had clarified him. He stepped forward, slowly. "I followed the code," he said. "You followed fear." The masters shifted, uneasy. Another replied, "Your attachment to mercy has weakened you." Radaki shook his head. "Mercy didn't weaken me. It revealed us." A long silence stretched across the chamber. Radaki felt calm. Not the calm of meditation, the calm of acceptance. The council delivered their final decision. He would not be expelled. Not officially. That would invite questions. Instead, he would be placed on permanent reserve, stripped of teaching rights, command authority, and council access. He would remain a Jedi only in title, a hollow one, a decorative shape, a symbol with no purpose. When the meeting ended, he didn't wait for dismissal. He left the chamber, walked down the long spiral corridor, and stepped into the garden where he once taught younglings how to breathe through fear. The garden had not changed, but he had. He sat beneath the old tree in the center, closed his eyes, listened. Not for the council, not for the order, for the Force. And it spoke with a clarity he'd never felt before. Not a command, a truth. "The wound you carry will not heal here." He opened his eyes. Something inside him released. Not anger, not darkness, the belief that the Jedi could still save him. He stood, walked out of the temple, and did not look back. The Jedi had abandoned him, but the Force had not. And in that quiet certainty, Radaki took his first step toward the name he would one day claim. Darth Krall. He didn't pack much when he left Coruscant. No robes, no rank insignia. Just the clothes he wore beneath them, a small field pack, and his saber, the same one he had once raised in the defense of peace. He didn't know where he was going. Only that he couldn't stay. The Jedi Temple didn't stop him. No guards, no last words, just a cold silence that followed him all the way to the docking bays. As the freighter lifted off, Radaki didn't look back, because there was nothing left to return to. He traveled without destination, drifted from system to system. The galaxy was still burning, not in one place, but everywhere. Civil wars, Sith uprisings, pirate empires, broken worlds. The Jedi claimed to be winning, but Radaki saw only survivors. People rebuilding from ashes. Children who had never seen a city untouched by war. Farmers growing food in irradiated soil. He didn't preach, didn't explain who he had once been. He just helped. When raiders attacked a convoy outside Haruan Kal, he boarded their vessel alone and deactivated the engines from the inside. No lightsaber, just precision. When a plague swept through a colony on Jakelia, he quarantined the infected and taught the healthy how to synthesize medicine from local spores. He stayed behind to burn the bodies. When a dark force cult poisoned a water supply on Golvek, he purified the well with raw power, no form, no technique, just instinct. Each time, he moved on before anyone could ask his name, because he didn't know what to call himself anymore. He was not Sith. He was not Jedi. He was something between something unfinished. And in that space, something began to grow. He spoke to the Force differently now. Not as a servant, not as a student, as an equal. Not in arrogance, in honesty. He no longer asked the Force what to do. He asked it what was true, and it answered. Not in language, in instinct, in visions, in pain. He began to feel things others could not. Patterns behind destruction. Echoes behind silence, places where the Force bled out of the galaxy like an open wound. He followed those wounds, to shattered temples, crushed ships, abandoned strongholds, places the Jedi had buried, places the Sith had forgotten. And there, in the shadows, he began to see the outline of something ancient. Not a path, a scar. One that ran through both light and dark, and through him. He no longer saw himself as lost. He saw himself as unfinished, not broken, not exiled, becoming. He didn't light his saber unless he had to, but when he did, the blade felt different. It didn't hum with duty, it screamed with memory, and still, he refused to name himself. He feared what the name would mean. Because once spoken, it could not be taken back. He kept moving. The outer rim was endless. And so was the hunger growing inside him. Not for power, for understanding. He wanted to know why the Jedi feared knowledge. Why the Sith clung to pain. Why the Force allowed both to rise and fall without end. He wanted to know what was beneath all of it. And as he drifted through the stars, deeper into forgotten systems and ruined sanctuaries, the galaxy began to forget the man called Radaki. But the Force did not forget. And in the spaces between silence and survival, it had already begun to call him something new, a name he had not earned, but one he would come to carry, not in honor. In truth, the outer rim did not welcome him. It tested him. Radaki arrived on worlds where law had no meaning, where flags changed weekly, where the Force felt wounded in ways the Jedi could not imagine. Each place carried a lesson not taught by masters, but carved into the land by suffering. His first lesson came on Velendar, a moon abandoned after a mining collapse. Thousands had died when the shafts caved in. The survivors lived in scattered camps, fighting over air filters and spare rations. Radaki offered help. They didn't trust him. Not until raiders attacked in the night armored scavengers who had come to take the remaining oxygen cells. Radaki intercepted them alone. Moving through the dark without a sound, he didn't ignite his saber until the last moment when the raiders turned their blasters on the children. The battle ended quickly, too quickly. When it was over, Radaki stared at the bodies and felt nothing. No guilt, no triumph, only clarity. Mercy was a choice, but so was violence. And in a place where peace did not exist, survival demanded both. The miners thanked him. He didn't stay. His second lesson came on Rithos, where a Sith warlord had enslaved villages to mine cortosis veins. Radaki infiltrated the compound at dusk. He expected cruelty. He expected brutality. He did not expect to recognize the fear in the warlord's eyes. The man wasn't a monster. He was a survivor of 3 different sieges, hunted by Jedi and Sith alike. He used chains only because chains had once been used on him. Radaki disarmed him without killing him, broke the cortosis shackles, freed the villagers. But the warlord didn't run. He knelt, not in loyalty, in surrender. "You understand," the man said. "You've seen what the Jedi refused to see." Radaki didn't answer. He left the man alive. He didn't know why. His third lesson came on Mortal, a world swallowed by lightning storms. In an abandoned tower, he found a vault sealed with ancient inscriptions, not Jedi, not Sith, something older. Inside were holocrons scorched by time, fragments of lost teachings, voices that echoed with truths neither order wished to speak. One fragment whispered, "The Force is not 2 paths, it is one river with many currents." Another, "Light teaches restraint, dark teaches strength. Both are incomplete." Radaki listened, not with obedience, with hunger. He spent weeks studying the fragments, piecing together ideas the Jedi would have called heresy. He learned of warriors who used emotion without surrendering to it. He learned of healers who drew on shadow to mend wounds light could not reach. Most of all, he learned that the Force did not punish curiosity, only fear did. When he left the tower, the storms parted for a moment, a quiet corridor in a sky that never rested. He didn't take it as a sign. He took it as permission. His fourth lesson came from himself. On a desert outpost near the Polemian trade route, bandits captured him while he slept. They stole his saber, bound his wrists, dragged him into the dunes to bury him alive. He escaped, not through calm, not through meditation, through will, through instinct, through something the Jedi had once taught him to deny. When he reclaimed his saber, he didn't kill the bandits. He walked away, but the way they looked at him, terrified, awed, told him something had changed. He was no longer Radaki, the Jedi. He was something the Outer Rim whispered about. A wanderer without allegiance. A warrior with no master. A man learning that every lesson written in blood carved him a little further away from who he once was, and a little closer to the name waiting for him in the dark. The path did not reveal itself all at once. It appeared in fragments. A symbol carved into the side of a broken statue. A phrase whispered by a dying Sith apprentice. A holocron shard left behind in a looted temple. Radaki did not go looking for darkness. He followed questions, and the questions led him into places the Jedi had erased from their maps. His journey took him first to Wendar, a world petrified into stone by ancient weapons. Beneath the surface, in caverns untouched for millennia, he found the remains of a sanctuary neither Jedi nor Sith, a place dedicated to studying the Force without fear. Its teachings were simple. Emotion is a river, do not drown in it, but do not fear to drink. Radaki sat with those words for hours. The Jedi had taught him to dam the river completely. The Sith, he knew, drowned in it willingly. But this was balance without denial. He traveled deeper. In a locked chamber, he found a fractured holocron glowing faintly with red light. Its gatekeeper flickered, its voice distorted, but its message was not deceitful. The Jedi fear what they cannot control. The Sith fear what they cannot break. But the Force belongs to neither. Radaki closed the holocron slowly. He was not falling. He was learning. He left Wendar with more questions than answers. His next discovery came on Dathos Prime, a forgotten Sith observatory built long before the Rule of Two. Its halls were lined with ancient runes describing the earliest dark side experiments, not in domination, but in understanding. Here, Sith scholars had once studied the boundary between will and instinct. Some tested their strength against storms. Others meditated inside seismic rifts, letting the planet's heartbeat sync with their own. Radaki walked those halls carefully. He did not embrace their methods. He studied their patterns. The Jedi had warned that studying the dark corrupted instantly. But corruption was not what he felt. He felt recognition, not with their cruelty, with their curiosity. In one chamber, he found a journal left by a Sith chronicler long forgotten by his own kind. The final entry read, "The Force is not light or dark. It is hunger. It seeks to be understood, and it rewards those who dare to listen." Radaki didn't agree. Not fully, but he understood the sentiment. The Force he felt now was not the silent, polite presence of the Jedi Temple. It was vast, endless, alive. It did not punish him for asking the wrong questions. It punished him only for refusing to ask. On his final day at the observatory, he meditated at the edge of a shattered balcony overlooking a storm-racked ocean. Lightning split the sky. Waves crashed in violent rhythm, and the Force rose with the storm, not calling him, acknowledging him. He let the wind tear at his clothes, let the salt sting his skin, let the power hum around him. And for the first time, he let himself feel everything at once: anger, compassion, grief, clarity. He didn't lose control. He found it. He stayed there until the storm passed. When he descended the observatory steps, he felt different. Not stronger, defined. The path ahead was no longer blurred. It was waiting. But he understood something important. He was still not Sith. Not yet. He was a man standing between paths, not because he feared choosing, but because neither side deserved his allegiance. The Jedi had betrayed mercy. The Sith worshipped pain. But the Force had shown him a third truth, one that belonged only to those who walked alone. And that truth whispered a name he had not spoken aloud. Not Radaki, not Master. Something new, something earned, something waiting in the dark to be claimed. They found him near the ruins of Vensalor. 3 Jedi, sent not as emissaries, but as hunters. They wore cloaks marked with dust and ash, blades hidden but ready. They did not speak of peace. They did not ask for explanation. They came with a single directive: bring Radaki home, or end what remained of him. He met them without fear. He stood in the clearing as the sun fell behind broken stone. They called him by his old name. He did not respond. One stepped forward, a knight he once trained beside. She asked him what he had become. He said nothing, because she wouldn't understand. She quoted the code. He recited silence. The 3rd Jedi drew his saber. The others followed. 3 blades ignited in the dark. Radaki did not reach for his weapon. He closed his eyes. The Force pulsed around him, not in anger, not in hatred, but in stillness. When he opened them, he whispered, "You came to reclaim something that no longer exists." And then he moved. The duel was not elegant. It was raw. It was fast. Radaki did not fight with Jedi form. He didn't fight like a Sith. He fought like a wound that had learned to breathe. The 1st Jedi fell to the ground, disarmed, not killed. The 2nd leapt to strike and was caught mid-air, redirected by a Force push too sharp to see. The 3rd, the one he once called friend, hesitated, and Radaki stopped. He could have struck her down. He didn't. She lowered her blade, tears in her eyes. "You're not him anymore," she whispered. He nodded, and in that moment, it became real. The Jedi turned and left, not defeated, undone. Radaki stood alone again, not because he wanted to be, because he had to be. That night, he built a fire, not for warmth, for ritual. He removed the last of his old belongings, the robes, the temple ring, the lightsaber crystal given to him by his master when he was knighted. He placed them in the flames. He watched them burn. He didn't mourn. He didn't speak. But inside, something final shifted. He was not lost. He was found. Not by the order, by the truth. He took the hilt of his saber and replaced its core not with a crystal grown in meditation, but one taken from the ruins of a long-dead Sith Lord, polished by time and sacrifice. It did not pulse with rage. It hummed with memory. He ignited the blade. It burned crimson, but it did not scream. It sang, not of darkness, of liberation. He breathed slowly. No longer a Jedi, not yet a Sith, but something new, a scar in the Force, a question without allegiance, a will that would not be buried. And finally, alone beneath the stars, He spoke the name the Force had whispered. Not a title, not a mask, a truth. I am Darth Krall. The name did not feel foreign. It felt earned. He wrote it on the stone beside the fire. Not so others would remember, so that he would never forget. He was not created by power. He was forged by betrayal. He did not rise from darkness. He rose from clarity. The Jedi would tell themselves he fell. They would erase his name from records, warn their students of him in quiet tones, call him a heretic, a traitor, a wound in the galaxy. But the truth was simpler. Radaki had died, because the Jedi no longer had room for mercy. And from his ashes, Darth Krall was born. The Jedi said the 100-year darkness was a mistake, a time of corruption, a wound in the history of the Order. They taught it as a lesson, the danger of exploring forbidden paths, the price of pride, the fall of those who strayed. But they never taught the names of the fallen. They never explained what they had done. Krall wanted to know, not out of obsession, out of need. He had seen what the Jedi called peace. He had bled for it, watched them sacrifice the innocent to protect their structure. He had begged for mercy to matter, and they had answered with silence. So he searched for what they tried to forget. He followed echoes, fragments in the Force, old coordinates erased from official records, places where the Jedi had buried their shame. The first ruin was on Hs IV, a jungle world where vines grew through the bones of temples. Beneath a cracked marble floor, he uncovered a sealed chamber. Inside, he found chains, not for prisoners, for containment. Carved into the walls were diagrams, half-formed creatures, twisted by energy. Not Sith spawn, not yet, but something close. He felt it in the stone. This was where the Jedi had learned fear, and sealed it in the ground. He moved on. The second site was deeper, forgotten. A vault buried beneath the northern spires of Fornax, locked behind a code in a dead language. He broke the seal, not with a key, but with the Force. Inside were data tablets so old they dissolved at touch. But one fragment remained. It spoke of Jedi who had broken with the Council not for power, but for truth. They had believed the Force was not a code to follow, but a field to shape. They experimented, they failed, and when their creations became unstable, the Council labeled them dangerous, and destroyed them. Krall sat in that vault for 3 days. He did not eat, he did not sleep. He listened, and the Force began to whisper things the Jedi had forgotten how to hear. The third site was a battlefield long since turned to glass by orbital bombardment. He walked across the black sands of cavalries, hearing the echoes of screams that had faded from memory. In a crater, he found a helmet, old, burned, still humming faintly with energy. He held it in his hands, and through the Force, he saw the last memory of the one who wore it, not a Sith, not a Jedi, but something else. A hybrid, a warrior shaped by both sides, abandoned by both. The memory ended with silence, not defeat, erasure. Krall stood in the center of the crater and felt it fully for the first time. The Jedi hadn't defeated darkness. They had buried it. And with it, they had buried something more dangerous. Possibility. What if the 100-year darkness hadn't been corruption? What if it had been evolution? He returned to his ship and sealed the hatch. He opened every journal, every artifact, every fragment, and he asked one question. What did they fear? Not anger, not chaos, but change. Because if the Force could be shaped, not just channeled, not just followed, but sculpted, then everything the Jedi believed would crumble. And Krall no longer believed in preservation. He believed in transformation. What he saw in those ruins wasn't a warning. It was a blueprint. And he knew, with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose, the 100-year darkness had never truly ended. It had only been waiting for someone willing to finish what the Jedi tried to destroy. Krall did not become a monster overnight. He became a scientist, a seeker, a man trying to finish a question the Jedi had abandoned out of fear. The ruins he had explored showed fragments of what the first heretics attempted during the 100-year darkness. But fragments were not enough. To understand their intent, Krall needed to recreate their steps, not for power, not for conquest, for truth. He began small. On the broken moon of Tyros 9, he built a crude laboratory inside a half-collapsed mining station. Power flickered. Air recyclers rattled. Every tool was scavenged from ruins, shipwrecks, or forgotten outposts. Nothing about the place looked like the lair of a dark lord. It looked like a graveyard, and Krall worked inside it with quiet purpose. His first experiments were harmless. He practiced stabilizing force resonance in crystals pulled from ancient battlefields. He altered the energy signature of insects, watching how the force responded to change. He meditated beside growth chambers, attempting to guide life rather than command it. Most attempts failed. Some ended with small bursts of corrupted energy. Others dissolved into dust. One crystal shattered in his hands, leaving a scar across his palm. The scar didn't bother him. Failure was a teacher the Jedi never respected. He kept going. Each test revealed more about the natural limits the Force imposed, and more importantly, how those limits could be bent. His second phase began when he traveled to a derelict cloning facility, forgotten after the early wars. Rows of tanks lay dormant. Power conduits hissed with decay. But the structure was intact. Krall didn't try to clone a being. He tried to clone potential. He infused nutrient vats with force-rich minerals, attempting to create a medium that could channel emotion in its raw form. He recorded how the liquid vibrated when he focused on it with anger, and how it shifted when he focused with compassion. The Jedi had always separated those emotions, but the vat reacted the same way to both. It didn't judge. It only reflected. Krall realized something then. The Force did not divide itself into light and dark. Only people did. The third phase began with a discovery he had not expected. While dismantling an ancient data core in his lab, he uncovered a phrase buried beneath corrupted files. Strength is shaped by pressure. Purpose is shaped by loss. It was not a Sith teaching. It was from the early Jedi schism, from those who believed peace had blinded the Order. It explained why some Jedi sought to create new Force warriors during the 100-year darkness. They weren't trying to destroy the galaxy. They were trying to evolve it. Krall closed the file. He sat in silence, and for the first time, he understood the shape of the work before him. He wasn't recreating monsters. He was recreating possibility. If the Jedi had strangled growth through fear, then his task was to break fear's grip. His fourth phase was more dangerous. He began to test living subjects, not people, not sentients, only simple organisms. Creatures incapable of thought, incapable of suffering. He exposed them to fluctuations in Force energy, mapping how their forms shifted, how their instincts reacted. Some grew stronger. Some grew unstable. Some grew silent in ways that unsettled him. But he kept meticulous notes. He wasn't trying to build a weapon. He was trying to understand what the Force wanted from living flesh when shaped with intention. His work was slow, steady, patient, but something inside him had already changed. He no longer saw the Jedi as guardians. He saw them as jailers, keeping the galaxy safe from truths they didn't want to face. And as he looked across his dim laboratory, filled with half-lit tanks and humming crystals, Krall understood something with perfect clarity. The Jedi had waged a war for order, but he was shaping something else entirely. A war for evolution. A war the galaxy wasn't prepared for. And a war he would fight alone. They weren't soldiers, not at first. They were orphans, slaves, survivors from forgotten planets scarred by the war. Children the Jedi overlooked, lives discarded by both Republic and Sith. Krall did not recruit them. He found them, one by one, scattered across the stars, not because he needed them, because they were already broken, and the galaxy had no use for the broken. He took them to the outpost on Tyros. 9 gave them food, warmth, safety, but he did not offer comfort, because comfort was not what they needed. They needed clarity. He didn't tell them what to believe. He didn't teach them the Jedi code. He showed them the Force the way he had learned it through pain, not cruelty. Truth, that the Force did not choose sides. It responded to will. He trained them not to obey, but to endure. Not to follow, but to feel. Meditation under crushing gravity fields. Hand-to-hand combat blindfolded. Deep immersion in Force resonance chambers designed to overload emotion, rage, sorrow, fear, love until the student no longer reacted to the feeling but used it. Some broke. Some wept. One tried to run. Krall let her go. Because loyalty born from fear was not loyalty. Only those who returned were ready to begin. His first creation was not a warrior. It was a girl no older than 15, silent, steady, forgotten by name. She had been left for dead during a Sith raid, buried beneath rubble for 3 days before Krall found her. He taught her how to move again, how to breathe through her trauma, how to harness the hatred without being consumed by it. She did not speak. But when she fought, the Force moved around her like a storm contained in glass. Krall named her Rill, not as a title, as a beginning. He did not call them acolytes. He did not call them Sith. They were vessels of pressure, of discipline, of transformation. Each of them bore scars not from training, but from survival. And Krall used those scars as mirrors, reminders that power was not found in strength. It was forged in weakness, endured, and then turned into choice. He modified their cells using Force resonance techniques rediscovered from ancient texts. Not mutation, alignment. He amplified their ability to connect with raw sensation, sharpening their instincts, dulling the static between thought and reaction. The Jedi would have called it unnatural. But nothing about the galaxy was natural anymore. The children grew, not as weapons, as instruments, designed not to conquer, but to continue to carry a philosophy that could outlive him. One shaped not by hierarchy or prophecy, but by pain turned into purpose. He taught them that love was not weakness, that fear was not failure, that darkness was not death. Only disconnection was death. He trained them to feel everything and remain standing. By the end of the first cycle, 9 remained, each different, each changed. He watched them meditate in silence, one evening seated in a circle around a core of glowing ash. Their eyes closed, their breathing steady, their thoughts humming with clarity. He didn't smile, but he felt something close. These weren't monsters. They were the answer to a question the Jedi had never dared to ask. What if power didn't require purity? What if strength was born through suffering? not to justify it, but to overcome it. Krall didn't think of them as followers. They were not his shadow. They were his legacy. And when he looked into the stillness of their minds, he saw something terrifying. They did not worship him. They understood him, and in that understanding, they began to understand themselves. The first rumor reached the Jedi Temple as a whisper. A settlement destroyed in the Mid-Rim, not by Sith, not by pirates, but by something unrecorded. Survivors spoke of warriors who did not bleed, who moved in perfect unity, who spoke no language the Jedi recognized. They left no banners, only silence. At first, the Council ignored it. Then came a second report. A listening post on the edge of the outer rim vanished. No distress signal, no wreckage. Only a final log entry that spoke of a man with red eyes and a voice that sounded like memory burning. The Jedi grew cautious. Not alarmed, cautious. They sent scouts. Some returned. Most didn't. Krall knew they were coming long before they arrived. He watched them from the shadows of forgotten systems, from derelict ships and shattered moons. They didn't see what he'd built. They couldn't understand what they were looking for, because what he had created wasn't a rebellion. It was a revelation. He didn't hate the Jedi anymore. Hate was personal. What he felt was colder. He saw them now as a species unto themselves evolved to survive, not adapt. They feared what could not be explained, feared what they could not teach, and above all, feared what they could not erase. Krall did not seek war, but he didn't run from it. When the Jedi finally confronted him, it wasn't with debate, it was with sabers. They found him on a dead world called Betrayal. A team of 5, all seasoned, all loyal. They came in silence, no warning, no trial. Krall was waiting. He did not attack first. He asked a question. Why now? One of them answered, because you've gone too far. Krall stepped into the open. Too far for what? No one replied. So he made it clear, you're not here to save me. You're here to bury what you fear. And then, he fought. It didn't last long. He didn't kill them all. Only the one who tried to strike his students. The others fled. Not from defeat, from uncertainty, because what they saw was not a Sith Lord cackling in rage. What they saw was a man who should have been one of them, standing in the ruins of everything they denied. They returned to the Council. The report was sealed. Krall's name was labeled as a dark heretic, a level 9 threat, a monster. He heard it whispered across the stars. He wasn't offended. He was amused, because they still didn't understand. He hadn't become a monster. He had been made one, forged by their silence, sharpened by their exile, empowered by the truth they refused to face. He stood one night beneath a red sky, watching his students spar without weapons, just movement, just intention. Their forms flowed like smoke. They were graceful, focused, free. Krall spoke aloud, not to them, but to the Force. This is what they feared. Not destruction, replacement. The Jedi weren't defending peace. They were defending control. And the thing they called a monster was the first glimpse of what came after them. He looked into the darkness beyond the horizon, not afraid, not uncertain. He knew more battles would come. The Jedi would return, stronger, more desperate, but Krall would not hide. He had outgrown shadows. He would not run. He had outlived mercy. He would not kneel. He had transcended names. And what the Jedi failed to destroy would one day become legend, not because it was righteous, but because it refused to die. They were not temples, not in the way the Jedi would define them. There were no statues, no sermons, no light. Only silence, and stone, and ash. Krall built them in places no star maps remembered, on moons stripped bare by ancient war. In caverns where Sith lords once bled their apprentices dry. Inside hollowed ruins where Jedi prisoners once begged for a peace that never came. He didn't build to honor the past. He built to erase it. Each chamber served a purpose. One for conditioning the body. Gravity shifted until bones screamed and nerves learned to obey fear. One for breaking the mind's sensory chambers where silence was louder than screams and the Force whispered things no one had words for. One for resurrection, not of the dead, but of those who had outlived who they were. The walls were lined not with text but with remains. The bones of failed Jedi, discarded Sith, and nameless Force sensitives who had vanished before they could be remembered. Krall did not bury them. He built around them. As a warning, as a foundation. These were not graves. They were reminders. The Force had never promised fairness, only potential. He taught his students that suffering was not cruelty, it was clarity. When the body fails, the mind awakens. When the mind breaks, the will speaks. And when the will survives, it becomes something else. The first to enter the temples were not chosen. They were sent, cast into the lower halls without food, light, or instruction. For 3 days, they endured. No beds, no teachers. Just themselves, and what the Force would show them when everything else had been taken. Some clawed at the walls until their fingers bled. Some cried. Some fought each other. One sat still the entire time, eyes closed, unmoving. That one survived. When the doors opened, the survivors were not praised. They were told the truth. "You have not passed," Krall said. "You have begun." Their real training didn't happen with sabers. It happened with silence, with discipline, with failure that burned away anything that wasn't real. They learned to listen without ears, to feel before being struck, to kill a thought before it became fear. Each trial was written in flesh. Some were strapped into pressure chambers, their nervous systems flooded with conflicting Force signatures. Some were placed in mirrored rooms where illusions reflected their worst memory again and again until they no longer reacted. Some were forced to relive death itself, over and over, until they understood it was never the end. Those who survived these rituals did not return unchanged. Their skin bore inscriptions, not tattoos, not markings, but scars shaped by focused Force pressure. Ritual scars. Living text. Written in pain. Remembered in silence. Each scar told a story. Of what they'd lost. Of what they'd killed. Of what they'd chosen to become. And Krall read them like scripture. Not to judge, to understand, because these were not students anymore. They were material. Living proof that suffering could shape form not just mentally but physically. The Force responded to pain, and Krall was learning how to guide that response. One night, as lightning cracked across the sky above his deepest sanctuary, Krall stood at the entrance to the lowest chamber. Behind him, the walls glowed faintly with crimson crystal. Before him, the screams had already begun. He closed his eyes, listened, and whispered to the Force, "This is not death. This is birth." Pain was not the purpose, but it was the method. Krall did not teach his students to endure for endurance's sake. He taught them to listen to the breaking, to feel it, to understand what lay beneath it. The body is a gate, he told them. Most Jedi believe that gate must be protected, strengthened, preserved. Krall believed it must be opened, and opening always came with tearing. He began with movement. Simple at first forms practiced under low gravity, then inverted gravity, then zero. When muscle memory failed, they learned to feel instead of think. Then came restraint. He bound their limbs with force-dampening cuffs, forced them to spar without sight, without balance, without clarity. Not to humiliate, to recalibrate, to remove the illusion that they were whole. Because no one is whole at the beginning, he stripped away comfort. No beds, no medication, no warmth unless it was earned. Each student was assigned a partner, one to train with, one to sleep near, one to protect. And when Krall separated them, it was always during the hardest trials. He taught them that attachment was not weakness. Dependency was. So he cut it away, one by one, until each student could stand alone, not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. Then he broke them further, not with whips, not with fire, with truth. He opened the nerve centers in their minds, using directed force pressure, ancient Sith techniques modified for precision. Not to torture, to awaken. He flooded them with overlapping sensations, joy and fear, rage and peace, regret and serenity. Each emotion pressed into the same moment. Most collapsed. Some screamed. One tried to claw her own face apart, just to make it stop. Krall stopped her gently. He told her she was close. Because beneath all those feelings was the core the Jedi never taught them to see. Will, not the desire to win, the refusal to disappear. He called it the fracture point, the moment when a being touches the edge of their own destruction and steps forward anyway. He trained them to reach that point and hold it. They stopped using names, only glances, breaths, shared rhythms in meditation. The more their bodies broke, the stronger their presence in the Force became, not louder, clearer, sharper. They did not rise with pride, they rose with definition. One student's eyes changed, permanently, not blind, not augmented, rewritten. Another's skin hardened in response to pressure fields, not armor, not mutation. A reflex of survival so deep it echoed in the Force itself. Krall didn't create these changes. The students did. Their bodies responded to the path their minds refused to turn from. He only opened the door. They chose to walk through it. And still, some failed. Some shattered at the edge of transformation. Their bodies rejected the stress. Their minds collapsed into silence. Krall did not mourn them. He burned their remains, not in punishment, in honor. They had reached the gate. They simply could not pass. And that, too, was truth. Pain did not always make you stronger. Sometimes it simply revealed you had nothing left to give. But for those who survived, something new took shape. Not soldiers, not Sith. Something without a name. They no longer feared agony. They no longer hesitated. They moved like thought given mass, precise, empty, unburdened by morality. And Krall, watching from the shadows, knew what he had done. He had not taught them strength. He had removed the walls that kept them from finding it. And in doing so, he had turned flesh into function, and suffering into design. They stopped speaking in words, not because they couldn't, because they no longer needed to. The strongest of Krall's students, those who survived the trials of isolation, the crushing of the body, the rewiring of the mind, began to evolve past language. They moved in sync without signals. They shared memory through the Force like echoes in a shared mind. One would fall in training. Another, miles away, would bleed. Their thoughts were not linked by power. They were fused by purpose. Krall watched in silence. This was not mind control, not indoctrination. It was a resonance, a harmonic built through pain, purpose, and proximity. He called it the chain, a bond formed between those who had passed through the same threshold of transformation. Each new initiate who survived the rituals found themselves pulled into it, reshaped by it. Their instincts sharpened, their emotions narrowed, not because Krall demanded it, because the chain required it. He began testing the limits. He split them across 3 systems, different planets, different stress conditions. One team placed under threat of capture, another denied food and force access, a third cut off from sensory input entirely. All 3 survived, not through strength, through each other. They did not send messages, they felt direction. When one group moved, the others shifted. When one reached the edge of failure, the others steadied. Not with comfort, with focus. Their connection was not compassion. It was conviction. The Jedi would have called it unnatural. Krall knew better. It was evolution. The Force had always been a web, but the Jedi had taught themselves to move across it as individuals. His students were the web. Each of them carried fragments of a greater whole. Their identities faded, not in loss, but in refinement. They were no longer seeking meaning. They were the meaning, thought given form, memory made into movement. Krall saw it most clearly in one of his earliest pupils, Rill, the girl who had once sat motionless for 3 days in silence. She no longer flinched when attacked. She no longer blinked when shouted at. She did not react. She anticipated, as if the idea of threat itself had to pass through her before it could exist. He placed her alone in a chamber filled with ancient Sith artifacts, objects dripping with violent energy, meant to tempt, to seduce, to overwhelm. She stood in the center of it all, and felt nothing. Not resistance, not corruption, stillness, as if the dark no longer had anything to offer her. Krall smiled. He didn't praise her. She didn't expect it. Praise was for the unfinished, and she was not unfinished anymore. He recorded the results, began shaping the next phase, no longer focused on survival, but replication. Could the bond be transferred? Could the chain be stretched across time? He introduced younger subjects to the older ones not for teaching, but for mirroring. He observed how the resonance passed, how the force shifted, and it worked. Not every time, but often enough. The chain could grow. Thought could be seeded like fire across dry land. It only needed kindling, and Krall had kindled enough pain to light a galaxy. They became more than students, more than warriors. They became ideas, and an idea with teeth doesn't need an army. It only needs to survive long enough to bite. Krall stood before them one night beneath the stars of a nameless system. He said nothing. Neither did they. And yet, they heard him. They understood him, because they were no longer his creation. They were his continuation. Krall stood at the edge of a canyon carved by ancient bombardment. The wind carried dust across the sky like drifting ash. His students waited behind him, silent, still, unblinking. They were no longer children, no longer broken things pieced together by desperation. They were complete, and completion had a sound. A hum in the force, so quiet it felt like the galaxy holding its breath. Krall didn't turn to face them. He didn't need to. He felt them as clearly as he felt his own heartbeat, each mind a different rhythm, each presence a different shape, all connected by the chain he had forged through pain and purpose. He spoke softly. "You are not weapons." Silence answered him. "You are not Sith." The wind shifted. "You are not Jedi." A heartbeat passed. Then another. "You are what comes after." He led them into the lowest chamber of his final sanctuary, a cavern older than the Republic, older than the Sith, older than anything written in Jedi history. Bones lined the walls. Not from his students, from experiments abandoned by ancient sects that had once tried to reshape the Force. Krall had studied their failures. He had improved on them. In the center of the cavern was a pit filled with shimmering dust, the remnants of Sith alchemy reduced to its purest components. The dust glowed faintly when touched by thought. Krall stepped beside it. He extended his hand. His students followed, surrounding the pit in a perfect circle. No one breathed. The force inside the chamber thickened, pulled taut like a bowstring. The dust began to rise in thin spirals, each one responding to their combined presence. This was not a ritual. This was a declaration. Krall closed his eyes. He let his memories pass through him: exile, betrayal, mercy punished, truth revealed. He recalled every moment the Jedi had chosen order over life. Every moment the Sith had chosen cruelty over purpose. Every moment he had stood between those ruins and asked why no one dared to build something new. The dust swirled faster. The chamber trembled. His students didn't flinch. They accepted the tremor, not as threat, but as affirmation. Krall spoke, not to them, but to the Force itself. Life is not fragile. The dust rose higher. It does not need harmony. The glow intensified. It needs room to grow. He opened his eyes. And growth is never gentle. The pit roared like a storm. The dust ignited in a burst of crimson light, wrapping around the students like molten threads. The ground cracked beneath their feet. But there were no screams. Only focus. When the light vanished, the students stood transformed not in body, but in presence. The Force around them no longer felt like scattered fragments of individuals. It felt like a single intention, a single shape, a single will. Krall breathed out slowly. He had not created monsters. He had created clarity. And clarity did not beg for forgiveness. He looked at them, at Rill, at the survivors, at the ones who had crossed the threshold no Jedi or Sith had ever dared to understand. "You are the future," he said. He meant it. Not metaphorically. Literally. They would outlive him, outgrow him, outthink him, as every evolution must. He turned from them and faced the canyon again. The wind howled through the shattered stone. The galaxy would learn of his work soon. The Jedi would call them abominations. The Sith would call them threats. The Republic would call them nightmares. But the Force would not mourn them. Because the Force does not weep for those who were never meant to fit inside old definitions. Krall closed his eyes. For the first time, he did not feel alone. He felt surrounded by possibilities. And in that moment, he understood the truth the Jedi had feared most. Evolution is not mercy. It is inevitability. It began as a rumor. A settlement wiped clean from the stars. No signs of conflict. No cries for help. Just silence. Then a transport convoy disappeared along the Rimmer trade route. 2 Jedi assigned to protect it were never found. Their distress beacon activated for 12 seconds. Then it was gone. The Council sent investigators. They returned with nothing. No wreckage. No bodies. No trace. Only patterns. Subtle shifts in force resonance across sectors that should have been dormant. A quiet pressure building beneath normal space. Like sound waiting to break open. At first, the Council denied the pattern. Coincidence, chaos, pirates, cultists. But some knew better. Some remembered the name they'd buried years ago. Darth Krall. The name was never spoken aloud. It existed in sealed records, blacked-out transcripts, whispered conversations between masters who no longer trusted each other. Krall had vanished after his last recorded confrontation. Not captured, not confirmed dead, simply gone. The Jedi had hoped time would finish what they hadn't. But time did not erase what had been born in silence. It only let it grow. When 3 more colonies went dark within a month, each surrounded by force tremors, the Council couldn't explain the denial began to crack. One master described it as something breathing through the force. Another simply said, he's still out there. Still teaching. Still building. The Council called an emergency session. 12 seats. 12 voices. No unity. Some demanded immediate action, a strike, a purge. Others warned that confronting Krall might spark something larger, a schism, a new war, a philosophy the next generation wasn't ready to face. They argued, they debated, but the Force didn't wait. In the Outer Rim, a Jedi Knight named Dalan Ma traced the rumors to a storm-shrouded planet near the edge of known space. What he found was not a military outpost. It was a sanctuary, empty, clean, peaceful, and covered in carvings written in no known dialect. He sent one message before he vanished. They don't resist. They don't defend. They just wait. That was enough. The Council voted in secret. A task force was assembled: 16 Jedi, 7 Knights, 6 Masters, 3 Shadows. No public record, no announcement. The mission was not to negotiate. It was to erase, to finish what the Jedi had left undone. Krall was not a lost Jedi anymore. He was an infection, an echo of a question they had never answered. And questions, once asked, do not die. The strike force departed at night. Their ships launched without escort. Their orders encrypted and sealed. None of them told their Padawans. None of them expected to return. The Jedi told themselves it was the right thing. A necessary end. A last purge before the archives were cleansed for good. But some of them felt it in the silence between hyperlane jumps, in the stillness before landing. This wasn't justice. It was fear, dressed in finality. And behind that fear was shame. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. They hadn't come to confront a Sith Lord. They had come to bury a mirror. And the man waiting on the other side of the battlefield would show them exactly what they had become. They expected war. They prepared for it. The Jedi strike team descended on the outer moon of Rythares, guided by a fractured trail of energy signatures, whispered rumors, and a name the Council wouldn't write down. They moved with discipline. No noise, no transmissions. 17 Jedi, trained for conflict, taught to end what diplomacy could not. But when they reached the surface, they found no resistance, no perimeter, no weapons, just stone and silence. The structure before them looked more like a ruin than a fortress. Worn pillars wrapped in vines, weathered steps half swallowed by soil. At its center stood a door with no mechanism, no lock, no defense. The Jedi moved in. Blades unlit, eyes sharp. The door opened on its own. Inside, they found not soldiers but students. Meditating, waiting, not armored, not armed, just breathing. One Knight hesitated. "These aren't Sith," she whispered. A master replied, "They follow one." The students stood. They did not run. They did not bow. They stepped aside, revealing the central chamber, and at its heart, Krall. He didn't speak. He didn't stand. He simply watched them enter. The Jedi spread out. They formed a circle. Krall looked at them not with hatred, with understanding. He knew why they were here, and they knew they had arrived too late. This wasn't a cult. It was a conclusion. One master demanded surrender. Krall didn't answer. He looked to his students. One by one, they turned and left the chamber. Not afraid, not ashamed, prepared. The strike team didn't stop them. They didn't know how. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was something else. Something older. One shadow stepped forward. "You've led them into darkness," she said. Krall's voice was quiet. "No, I led them through it." They ignited their sabers. Krall didn't move. He didn't need to. The walls around them were inscribed with memory, every death, every exile, every trial. Each line carved by the hands of those who had survived what the Jedi called impossible. And for a moment, the chamber breathed. The Force shifted. The Jedi felt it. Not darkness, not rage, clarity. A storm with no wind. A silence that made them remember everything they'd buried. The first strike came fast. A knight leapt forward. Krall stepped into him like a wave-breaking stone. The second died before his saber lit. The chamber erupted. 17 Jedi. One man. But Krall did not fight with anger. He fought like a memory made solid. Each blow a lesson. Each movement a scar. They tried to surround him. He moved through them like water through fire. He didn't taunt. He didn't shout. He taught. And for each lesson, one more Jedi fell. Some were killed. Some were simply broken. Unable to move. Unable to understand what they were seeing. Because Krall wasn't fighting against them. He was fighting for what they had refused to become. And they knew it. The Masters pushed harder. Force blasts. Tactical strikes. Mind breaks. Krall absorbed them. Reflected them. Turned their precision into doubt. He wasn't winning. He was revealing. What the Jedi had feared. What they had exiled. What they had created. By the end, the floor was covered in ash. Not smoke. Not blood. Just ash. The remains of robes. Of identity. Of silence finally shattered. And when the dust settled, Krall still stood. His blade dimmed. His breathing slow. Only a handful of Jedi remained. They didn't speak. They didn't charge. They turned and left. Because they understood now. They had come to erase a threat, but found a truth, and no blade could burn that away. The survivors did not flee far. They regrouped in the outer corridors of the sanctuary, bruised, trembling, stripped of the certainty they carried into battle. Their robes were torn, their breathing uneven. And for the first time since their training began, they doubted. But duty does not bend for doubt. One master steadied herself against the wall, gripping her saber with shaking fingers. "He cannot be allowed to leave this moon," she whispered. No one answered, because no one believed he intended to leave. Krall walked through the archway at the end of the hall, slowly, calmly, as if the battle behind him had been a meditation instead of a massacre. His blade glowed faintly, not bright, not triumphant, just present. The Jedi raised their sabers. Krall extinguished his. He looked at them with the same stillness he had carried as a Jedi Knight, the same quiet clarity, the same truth they had chosen to ignore. "You're afraid," he said. A younger knight stepped forward, voice shaking. "We're not afraid of you." Krall's expression did not change. "You're afraid of what I learned." The masters tightened their stance. That was all the answer he needed. He ignited his blade, and the hall erupted. The first clash of sabers shook the dust from the ceiling. Krall moved like a consequence, not fast, not brutal, but inevitable. Every step he took narrowed the space they thought they controlled. A knight struck from behind. Krall didn't turn. He pulsed the force backward, sending him into the wall hard enough to crack stone. Another tried to bind his mind, a Jedi shadow trained to break thoughts before they formed. Krall's presence didn't resist. It swallowed. Her concentration shattered like glass. A master used both hands to channel a stun wave through the corridor. The air rippled. The ground trembled. Krall walked through it. Not unharmed, unafraid. He wasn't stronger than them. He was finished in a way they weren't. 17 Jedi had entered this hunt. Now only 5 remained. They fought together, coordinated, disciplined, perfectly trained. Krall fought alone, but his solitude was not weakness. It was identity. He deflected a synchronized strike, stepped inside their formation, and turned their unity into a cage. One saber dropped. Another flickered out. The third defender fell to his knees, clutching his chest as the force compressed around him. Krall didn't kill him. He didn't need to. Defeat was already carved into the man's breath. 2 masters remained, the strongest among the team, the ones who had argued against coming, the ones who now understood why. They circled Krall from opposite sides, a tactic designed to force movement, to split focus. Krall stepped backward, not to retreat, to give the force room. Their blades struck simultaneously. Krall lifted his saber once. The impact sent a shockwave down the corridor. The walls cracked. The floor buckled. Both masters staggered. Krall did not. He moved forward and struck the older master's saber at the hilt. The weapon shattered. The man fell back, stunned by the speed, by the simplicity. The younger master lunged with a cry that carried years of regret. Krall caught her wrist. Their eyes met. For a moment, she saw him not as a monster, not as a Sith, but as the Jedi he once was. The Jedi the Council had broken. The man they had abandoned to silence. His voice was barely a whisper. This didn't have to happen. Her blade fell from her hand. And the fight ended, not in triumph. In exhaustion. 17 Jedi had been sent to erase him. Only 2 remained standing. Neither could lift their weapons. Krall deactivated his saber. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't offer surrender. He simply turned away, breathing slow, steady, final. This was not victory. This was inevitability. The last stand of Darth Krall was not a moment of power. It was the moment the Jedi understood the truth they feared most. They hadn't come to destroy darkness. They had come to destroy the reflection of their own failure. Krall did not fall in battle. He did not die with a cry, or a scream, or a final surge of power. He simply disappeared. When the smoke settled on Rytheris, only silence remained. The Jedi searched every chamber, every corridor, every hidden stairwell beneath the sanctuary. They found bodies, crushed stone, burned robes, severed sabers, but no trace of Krall. One knight claimed to have seen him vanish into the lower crypts, blade flickering, steps slow. Another swore he walked into the dust and never left a footprint. No one saw the moment it happened. No one knew if it was surrender, or escape, or something else entirely. The Council would never admit it. But even they could not explain where he went. So, they did what Jedi had always done with what they feared. They buried it. They sealed the moon, declared Rytheris restricted. They purged the mission records, filed the strike team under an internal disciplinary event, and Krall was erased, not killed, not condemned, erased. They removed his name from the Holocron archives. They redacted his trial transcripts. They dismantled the remaining sanctuaries and ordered every artifact to be destroyed or hidden in vaults deep beneath Coruscant. No memorial, no teaching, no lesson. The survivors were told to remain silent. Some obeyed, some didn't. One shadow, weeks later, would resign from the order, never speaking a word. Another disappeared into the unknown regions. Only one returned to the temple. He carried a scar across his chest, not from a blade, but from a moment. A moment when he realized the man he had tried to kill wasn't his enemy. He was his reflection. The council honored him for his service. They never asked what he had seen, because they already knew. Krall had not tried to conquer the Jedi. He had tried to show them what they refused to see. And in return, they chose silence. Not for the galaxy, for themselves. The Force did not speak of his death. No great tremor, no rupture, only a quiet void where a voice used to be. Some say he died in the crypts consumed by his own strength, or choosing to become one with the Force before they could take it from him. Others believe he escaped, that he left behind his name, his students, even his body, and became something else. A whisper in the minds of those who break away from dogma. A shadow in the dreams of Jedi who ask too many questions. But no proof remains. Only absence. Krall's followers scattered. Some were hunted. Some vanished. Some became something new. But none of them spoke his name again. Not because they forgot, because they remembered. And remembrance is a kind of rebellion. The Jedi told themselves it was over, that the wound had been closed. But the Force remembers. It remembers the boy who followed orders, the knight who chose mercy, the master they silenced, and the man who refused to die the way they wanted. No statues bear his face. No planet claims him. But if you listen closely, in the stillness between battles, in the silence before choices, you might hear him, not with ears, but with memory. The Jedi said he died alone. They were wrong, because the Force was with him, and the Force does not forget. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant held many secrets. Most of them were buried, not in sand or stone or time, but in silence, beneath the central archives, past the meditation wings and ancient statue halls. There existed a level most Jedi never entered. A place spoken of only in coded references. Sealed behind biometric gates and guarded by knights who did not ask questions. The Vault of Obscured Artifacts. Its name was ceremonial. Its purpose was not. This was where the Order kept the things it could not destroy. Sith relics, rogue holocrons, dangerous visions extracted from corrupted minds, shattered weapons that still hummed with trauma, crystals that pulsed even when sealed in carbon. Most Jedi believed the vault was only accessed in emergencies, when war demanded study of an enemy's tools, or when a threat had to be isolated before it spread. But some items were placed there, not because they were dangerous, because they were true, and truth, to the Jedi, could be the most dangerous thing of all. One of those truths sat on a shelf in the deepest cell of the vault, unlabeled, uncatalogued, a holocron no larger than a closed fist. Its frame was fractured not from age, but from something it had once resisted. The crystal core flickered irregularly, like breath catching in the throat. No one had activated it in years. No one dared. Even the guards assigned to the vault avoided that side of the room. Not by order, by instinct, because the holocron did not hum like the others. It listened. Padawans weren't allowed in the vault. Not officially, But the order had cracks, and within those cracks, curiosity lived. Some claimed to feel something when they meditated above that level. A tension, a presence, a whisper. The Force moved strangely in that place. It didn't warn. It waited. The Holocron's origin file had been erased. No creator listed. No recorded lineage. But one word remained in the metadata buried behind layers of failed deletions. Krall. The archivists didn't speak it. Not out of reverence, out of memory. Krall had been one of them. A Jedi, a master, a servant of peace, until he wasn't. And what came after was not discussed. But the object remained. And even sealed, even hidden, even buried beneath the most powerful temple in the galaxy. It breathed through the Force like a heart that refused to stop. One day, a junior archivist assigned to inventory an unrelated chamber brushed against the Holocron by accident. It flickered. He turned to face it, and it activated. No passcode, no voice recognition, no ritual, just presence. A projection appeared dim, incomplete. A man seated cross-legged, shoulders heavy, robes frayed. Not armored, not defiant, just still. He looked up and spoke one sentence. They taught me the code would protect the galaxy. They never taught me what to do when it didn't. The image faded. The Holocron dimmed. But the words stayed. Not just in the air, in the archivist's chest. He reported the incident. Filed a quiet memo to the higher ranks. The masters reviewed it, then deleted it. The Holocron was moved deeper into the vault, placed behind 2 more layers of security. Surrounded by relics even Sith refused to touch, and still, it waited. Because a voice once buried doesn't stop echoing. It only learns to speak through walls. The Holocron did not wake often. It waited. Days, weeks, entire seasons beneath the temple passed without sound. The vault lights flickered. Dust gathered on abandoned shelves. Jedi archivists came and went without noticing the small, fractured crystal resting in the corner of its cell. But the Force noticed. It moved around the Holocron the way wind moves around a broken monument, bending, whispering, remembering. And eventually, someone else noticed too. Her name was Dara, a Padawan barely old enough to stand in the main archives without supervision. She came down to the lower vault layers only because she admired the silence, the shadows, the stillness her masters insisted she learn to fear. She didn't fear stillness. She feared being unseen. And when she walked past the sealed chamber that night, the Holocron felt her. It pulsed once, soft, like a heartbeat knocking against stone. Relan froze. Most artifacts echoed with anger or hunger. This one echoed with something different. Recognition. She stepped closer, not because she meant to, because curiosity in the young is stronger than caution. The chamber door remained locked, but the Holocron didn't need opening. It activated through the glass. A thin projection rose unstable, flickering, barely forming the outline of a man. His face was not sharp. His features glitched between youth and age, between shadow and light. But his voice was whole, calm, measured, quiet. If you are listening, you already know something is wrong. Relan's breath caught. Holocrons didn't speak without permission. They didn't override vault protocols. They didn't activate themselves. But this one did. The projection continued. The Jedi taught me to trust clarity. Yet they demanded blindness. His tone wasn't angry. It was tired. The kind of tired only someone exiled by truth could understand. Relan stepped closer to the glass. The projection shifted, as if noticing her movement. The fractured light aligned for a heartbeat, revealing a full shape, a robed figure, seated cross-legged, hands resting on his knees. Not a monster, not a threat, a man. I asked questions they did not want asked, he said. And when my answers frightened them, they called it corruption. Rillin felt her stomach twist. She had asked questions too. She had been scolded for it. The projection softened. If you feel the Force pulling you in new directions, do not fear it. Fear the ones who tell you that direction is forbidden. A spark of static cracked across the image. The holocron dimmed. Krall, the man she'd only heard described as heretic, murderer, Shadow tried to continue speaking. But the vault's dampeners surged, choking the projection into silence. Rillin stumbled back. For a moment, the chamber felt colder. Then the holocron flickered again. One last line escaped, soft, barely audible. There is truth beneath the silence. Then it went dark. The lights stabilized. The vault quieted. The holocron lay still, as if it had never awakened at all. Rellin stood in the hallway long after the echoes faded. She should have reported it. She knew that. But when she placed her hand over her heart, she felt something the Jedi had warned her about since childhood. Certainty born not from doctrine, but from understanding. She left the vault in silence, and the holocron, buried deeper than any name, rested again, waiting, not for release, for the next mind willing to hear what the Jedi refused to say. Rellin did not sleep that night. She lay awake in the Padawan dormitories, staring at the ceiling while the holocron's fragmented voice echoed through her thoughts. If you are listening, you already know something is wrong. She had always felt it, a pressure inside the temple walls, a silence that seemed too heavy, too controlled. Questions she was told not to ask, feelings she was told not to trust. But until that night, she had believed the fault was hers. The next morning, she tried to meditate. She couldn't. Her thoughts kept straying to the vault, to the fractured crystal, to the weary voice that spoke like someone remembering a wound. By midday, she wasn't the only one. Rumors began to drift through the temple, soft at first, nearly invisible, like dust caught in a sunbeam. Padawans whispering of strange sounds below the archives, of a relic that activated on its own, of a voice that did not feel dark, yet did not feel Jedi. None of them said Krall's name. They didn't have to. The Force carried the shape of the truth, even when the tongue refused to speak it. One evening, Rellin found two Padawans sitting in the shadow of a meditation spire. They fell silent when she approached. But silence, among the young, is an invitation to curiosity. "What did you hear?" she asked. They shared a look, a long one. Then the older Padawan leaned forward. He said suffering isn't failure. Rellin's heart tightened. He also said the code hides things, the younger whispered. Not to protect us, but to protect itself. Another rumor surfaced a week later, this time in the cafeteria. A Padawan who trained in the vault levels claimed he felt a presence watching him. Not hostile, not hungry, aware. Someone else claimed a voice had spoken through their dreams, asking questions their masters refused to answer. What is the Force when you stop dividing it? Why must clarity be punished? Who benefits from your obedience? The whispers spread, not loudly, softly, carefully, like people afraid the walls themselves might be listening. Masters began noticing the shift. Meditations took longer. Lessons were interrupted by unspoken thoughts. Padawans hesitated when reciting the code, not out of rebellion, but reflection. One master reported that her entire class asked the same question on the same day. Why did the council seal away a holocron instead of destroying it? She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Not without resurrecting a memory the Jedi had sworn to bury. The council convened in private chambers. Their discussion did not appear in the temple logs. But the outcome became clear when access to the lower vaults was restricted. Suddenly all non-master profiles removed from authorization. The Padawans noticed, and their curiosity burned hotter. Because restrictions, in the eyes of the young, are confessions, Rellyn felt it strongest during an evening training session. Her blade hummed in her hands, but her mind drifted. Her instructor sensed her distraction. "You are unsettled," he said. She took a breath. "A holocron spoke to me." He stiffened. "Which holocron?" "I don't know," she said. But it didn't feel wrong. Her instructor looked away, jaw tense. "Some truths are not meant for Padawans." Rellyn swallowed. "Are they truths because they're dangerous, or dangerous because they're truths?" He dismissed her early. She walked back to her quarters alone. But she wasn't alone in her thoughts. All across the temple, minds were stirring. Not because Krall had spoken, because he had been silenced. And silence, once broken, becomes a question. A question the Jedi no longer knew how to answer. The Jedi Order acted swiftly. Access to the vault was cut off completely. The holocron was sealed behind durasteel casing layered with Ysalamiri cells, creatures the Jedi rarely used, that created voids in the Force itself. They were brought in quietly. No announcement, no record. Just a shift in the air. A silence beneath the silence. Masters called it a containment measure. A precaution. But no one explained what they were afraid of. Because fear, when buried, grows strange roots. Rellyn was questioned. Not accused. Not punished. Just asked to clarify what she saw. She gave simple answers. She didn't lie. She didn't have to. They weren't really listening to her words. They were listening for signs of belief. When they found none, they let her go. But by then, the questions had already taken root in too many minds. Not openly. Not in council chambers or training fields. In stairwells. In shadowed courtyards after curfew. In glances between friends when a master turned their back. Krall's teachings didn't spread like infection. They spread like memory. Because what he had said, what little the holocron had revealed, wasn't instruction. It was recognition. He hadn't preached darkness. He had named the pain others were too afraid to describe. And when the Order silenced him, they didn't stop his voice. They confirmed its truth. The vault guards changed shifts more often now. Some said one of them collapsed during a routine inspection, said the air near the holocron was too heavy, too full. He wasn't injured, but he left the temple a week later. Didn't say why. Didn't come back. Other artifacts began reacting. Relics that had lain dormant for years flickered when moved too close to the cell where Krall's holocron was kept. One cracked, another shattered in the hands of a senior archivist. The council blamed resonance. The archivists blamed proximity. But in whispers. Some blamed guilt. Because by then, the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Krall had not cursed the Order. He had reflected it. And reflections, even if hidden, always find their way back to the surface. A senior Jedi once said the Force is a current, not a structure. You can build walls in water, but eventually the water finds the cracks, and it flows through. Padawans kept asking questions. Some were transferred to distant outposts. Some were quietly dismissed. Some simply disappeared. But others remained. And over time, the name Krall became more than a whisper. It became a thought the Order could not touch, an idea planted in the minds of those who were never meant to carry it. Not a doctrine, not a rebellion, a possibility that perhaps the Jedi were wrong, not in their mission, in their certainty, and that perhaps exile was not a punishment, it was a transformation. The Holocron was never activated again, or so the records claimed. But when future generations descended into the vault for other duties, when they passed the reinforced door sealed behind half a dozen layers of silence, they always paused. They always felt something, not a warning, not a threat, a weight. Like someone had once poured truth into that room so deeply it never left. Even after the voice was gone, even after the Order moved on, even after the galaxy forgot his name, the memory remained. Because you can bury a man, you can erase his image, his teachings, his title, but you cannot kill what he made others feel, and that is what the Jedi feared most. Darth Krall left nothing behind, no grave, no relics, no apprentice to carry his will. The Jedi believed that meant his story ended. They convinced themselves that erasure was victory, that silence could bury a life they never understood. But the Force does not end with bodies. It ends with memory, and Krall's memory did not fade. It thinned, stretched, sank deeper into the quiet places between light and shadow. But it remained, like a scar beneath healed skin, invisible to the eye, impossible to remove. Centuries passed. Wars rose and fell. Empires collapsed. The Jedi Order was destroyed, rebuilt, broken again. And still, the Force whispered. Not loudly, not clearly, but with the same tone Krall once carried, calm, tired, certain. His presence lived in the cracks between certainty and doubt, in the minds of those who questioned the code, in the hearts of those who felt pain and wondered why the Jedi demanded they pretend otherwise. He became a sensation more than a figure, a soft pressure behind the thoughts of warriors who stood alone too long, healers who carried too much grief, scholars who felt the Force pulling them toward forbidden knowledge. They did not know his name. They only felt the echo. Some Sith felt it too. Not the rage they celebrated, nor the hunger they worshipped, but something colder, quieter, sharper. A reminder that true strength did not scream. It endured. And endurance leaves footprints. Ancient libraries recorded strange anomalies, meditations interrupted by unidentified signatures, Sith rituals reacting to patterns no living master had created. Apprentices dreaming of a robed figure who never turned to face them. A shadow in the Force. Not light, not dark, something in between. Some scholars argued it was a remnant of the 100-year darkness. Others believed it was the echo of a forgotten Jedi heretic. But none could explain why the sensation carried clarity instead of corruption, or why it felt less like a warning and more like a question. The galaxy changed, but Krall's echo did not. It drifted across time like dust carried by a quiet wind, settling briefly in minds ready to break, ready to learn, ready to see the world without the lies of orders or empires. A Sith Lord on Korriban once claimed he felt a presence while meditating, something patient, without desire. A Jedi Master on Ossus wrote of sensing a phantom voice asking, "What do you fear losing?" A wandering hermit in the Outer Rim dreamed of a man telling him that suffering was not death, only truth. They could not name the source, but the Force could, because the Force remembers every wound it carries. And Krall was a wound no era fully healed. He had no students, no school, no doctrine, Yet his existence shaped the edges of the galaxy not through power but through possibility. A possibility the Jedi feared. A possibility the Sith misread. A possibility that still whispered beneath the surface of the Force, waiting for the next mind brave enough to listen. The rule of two was born from fire. Darth Bane watched the Sith destroy themselves from within too many voices, too much ambition, too little clarity. And so, he shattered the Brotherhood. He made a new path, one master, one apprentice, no others. But within that rule lay something older, a whisper, a thread, not from Bane, but from someone who had walked the darkness long before him. Krall had no doctrine. He never named his path. But the Force does not care for names. It cares for patterns, for echoes, for truths too stubborn to die. Bane believed that only through conflict could the Sith evolve. That mercy was weakness, that suffering was not cruelty, but refinement. He believed the apprentice must crave the power of the master not to serve them, but to surpass them. And Krall had once said the same thing. Not in words, in blood. He had believed that the Jedi broke their own strength by shielding their students from pain. That only those who endured the fire of betrayal, of rejection, of failure could ever become more than tools of tradition. He did not pass this idea down. He did not write it in a book. He lived it. And somehow, the galaxy remembered. Some Sith believed that Bane's path was entirely his own, that he had reached into the void and carved truth from nothing. But Bane had studied the ancient texts. He had walked the tombs. He had read the erased records of Jedi heresies and fringe doctrines the Order had sealed in the vaults. He had seen Krall's name, just once, a footnote, a redacted sentence in a long-dead Jedi's journal. He refused to accept the code. He said pain was the Force's true voice. His eyes never left mine. I think he pitied me. Bane never cited him. He had no reason to. But the idea stayed with him. That the Force was not balance. It was pressure. And pressure did not shape the weak. It crushed them, and lifted only those strong enough to breathe beneath it. The rule of two was a structure, but Krall had been the philosophy behind it. Not vengeance, not dominance, transformation through endurance. Bane taught his apprentice that love was a lie, that loyalty was weakness, that strength only came from breaking. Krall had taught himself the same thing not because he craved power, but because he had nothing else left, no order, no allies, no comfort, only pain. And pain had revealed the truth. Centuries apart, they built the same weapon. A method of survival masked as a doctrine. The Jedi feared the rule of two because it worked, but they never understood why. Because they never understood Krall. He had never joined the Sith. But the Sith became more like him, and the Order he tried to save became everything he once rejected. The shadow was not in the rule. It was in the silence beneath it. Darth Plagueis searched for truth in places even Sith feared to enter. He dissected the Force the way a surgeon dissects flesh carefully, obsessively, without hesitation. His goal was not power for its own sake. It was understanding, control, mastery over life and death itself. And, in that pursuit, he studied every fragment, every forgotten text, every corrupted scroll sealed away by the Jedi or abandoned by the Sith. That was how he found Krall. Not a full record, not a biography, barely even a memory. Just a fragment, a damaged archive strip labeled with a warning sigil so old even Plagueis did not recognize it. Most of the recording was ash, but a few seconds survived. A flicker of a man seated in darkness. A voice that spoke with painful calm. Pain does not shape the Force. Pain reveals it. Plagueis froze the image, enhanced it, tried to force the Holocron interface to reveal more. But the fragment resisted. It refused to show a name. It did not need to. Plagueis felt it in the Force, a pressure unlike anything he had sensed. Not malevolent, not seductive, honest. A clarity sharp enough to cut thought. He spent weeks dissecting the fragment, searching for context. He traced unusual Force disturbances recorded during the new Sith Wars. He cross-referenced Jedi exile orders. He compiled every record of vanished experiments, forbidden techniques, erased masters. A pattern emerged, a shadow. Someone who rejected the Jedi code yet did not embrace the usual Sith hunger. Someone who believed suffering was not punishment, but instruction. Someone who had built warriors not for conquest, but for evolution. Someone erased by both orders. Plagueis admired him immediately. Not as a Sith, as a scholar. He replayed the fragment dozens of times, feeling the weight of each syllable, the steadiness of the voice, the absence of fear, the absence of pride. A man who had broken alone. A man who had rebuilt himself without guidance. A man who had carved truth from agony. Plagueis, who had studied the nature of fear, recognized something rare. Krall had none. He didn't fear death. He didn't fear loss. He didn't fear the Force. He feared only stagnation. Plagueis envied that. For all his brilliance, Plagueis's life was shaped by the rule of two, by the need to surpass his master and fear his apprentice. Krall had lived without such chains. His path had been his own, carved not from ambition but from betrayal. This intrigued Plagueis more than any Sith doctrine. He wrote one note in his private journal. There was another, a mind the Jedi feared, a voice the Sith ignored. A truth the galaxy rejected. He walks still in the currents of the Force, though he has no name. Plagueis did not try to resurrect Krall's method. He respected it too much to copy. But the idea, the seed Krall left behind, rooted itself in Plagueis's philosophy. That suffering clarified the Force. That identity must be broken to be rebuilt. That evolution required the willingness to abandon everything, even oneself. In that sense, Krall had achieved what neither Jedi nor Sith ever could. A legacy without lineage. A shadow without chains. A truth without a name. Darth Krall vanished. No empire mourned him. No monument bore his name. No apprentice lit a flame in his memory. But the Force remembered, not as light, not as darkness, as weight. He had not founded a lineage. He had not conquered a world. He had only asked one question, and lived its answer. What survives when everything is taken? The Jedi tried to erase him. The Sith ignored him. But the galaxy carried pieces of him forward, not in bloodlines, not in symbols, but in ideas. He became a phantom, not a ghost, but a shape, a form pressed into the fabric of the Force, detectable only by those who knew how to listen without expectation. Centuries passed. The Jedi Order fell, rose, and fell again. The Sith twisted themselves into new forms. The rule of two fractured. Palpatine's empire collapsed. Luke Skywalker rebuilt something old in a new shell. And the Force waited. Every now and then, a Jedi would question the code. A Sith would question their hatred. A warrior, alone on some dying world, would feel the Force whisper not with promise but with pressure. The kind Krall once described. The kind that does not speak until silence has taken everything else. None of them knew his name, but they walked his path. For a moment, then turned away, because his path had no reward, no victory, only truth. the kind most beings were not ready to carry, the kind that stripped identity, pride, and comfort, the kind that left you alone not because you were unloved, but because no one could follow where you had gone. There were rumors that a Jedi archivist once disappeared after touching an unnamed holocron too long, that one of Darth Plagueis's failed experiments had murmured Krall's name before dying, that Snoke, whatever he truly was, spoke of pain not as suffering but as clarity. And yet none of these claims could be proven, because Krall had left no claim to anything, no teaching, no mark, no doctrine, only a wound. And from that wound, others had drawn meaning, not because he had asked them to, because the Force had made it impossible to forget him. The Force does not care for monuments. It remembers through feeling, through pressure, through shadow. And so Darth Krall became a legacy without ownership, a whisper in the rule of two, a scar in the Jedi Code, a question at the heart of the Force that no one could answer. Not light, not dark, not balance, something else, something no order could accept, but no soul could fully ignore. He was never meant to be remembered, but those who suffered always did. They erased him from the archives, removed every record, burned his name from the war logs, and redacted the files from council chambers. To the Jedi Order, he had never existed. No Master Radaki, no Darth Krall, just a gap, a silent place in the history of the new Sith Wars. But the Force does not forget. Even without name or title, his presence remained, not as a ghost and not as a memory, but as a wound, a pressure like a whisper trapped beneath stone. Jedi historians studying the Battle of Harun Kal found reports that didn't match. Patterns of mutilated knights, missing task force leaders, descriptions of a cloaked figure whose movements were too precise, too practiced, not Sith, not Jedi. Something else, something angry. No one dared speak of it aloud. The few masters who remembered Radaki's fall were sworn to silence. The ones who knew what he had become refused to pass it on. Not out of mercy, but fear. Fear that someone, someday, would agree with him. Because Krall had not fallen for power, he had fallen for truth, and that made him dangerous in a way no Sith Lord had ever been. For decades, young Jedi Knights, stationed on the Rim or sent to aid relief missions, would hear the same strange rumors. A Force wielder who once wore the robes of the Order, who turned against both Jedi and Sith, and vanished into darkness, not for conquest, but for clarity. It was always dismissed. A myth, a tale told by Outer Rim smugglers or deranged survivors of ruined temples. But there was always one detail that remained unchanged. He hated the Jedi, not because they betrayed him, but because they betrayed themselves. And the Force, silent and eternal, did not argue. Even in temples, where his name was never spoken, and even among masters who prayed they had buried him deep enough, there were moments, quiet, cold moments when they felt it. A shadow, a weight, a reminder. They had not destroyed him. They had only hidden what they feared to see in themselves. And that was never enough. Krall did not break because he was weak. He broke because he finally saw the truth the Jedi spent centuries refusing to face, that their code was not protection. It was denial, a shield against the parts of life they didn't want to confront. Suffering, loss, confusion. The emotions they taught Padawans to fear were the same emotions that shaped every being in the galaxy. Krall had lived through battlefields where mercy led to slaughter, where compassion was punished, and where obedience demanded he ignore the dying. He had begged the Council to see what he saw, to change, to bend, to accept that the galaxy was not saved by purity, but by understanding. They exiled him instead. And in that exile, the fracture formed, not in the Force, in Krall's faith. He did not leave the Jedi because he hated them. He left because he realized they had stopped listening not to him, but to the very truth the Force was showing them. They had mistaken stillness for wisdom. They had mistaken control for clarity. And when Krall refused to bow to their blindness, they called him dangerous. He accepted that title, because to him, danger meant honesty. Across the galaxy, Jedi Knights who faced the harshest fronts of war began to feel something shift, a pressure at the edge of meditation, a quiet suggestion that survival was not found in peace, but in strength earned through suffering. None of them knew the source, but the sensation was unmistakable. It felt like a lesson, and it felt like Krall. He became the fracture in the light, the proof that the Jedi could be wrong, that their code could fail, that obedience could blind. His fall wasn't a corruption of darkness. It was a rejection of comfort, a refusal to pretend that the Force was gentle simply because the Jedi wished it to be. In the end, Krall did not break the order. He revealed it. The Jedi could hide his name. They could erase his records. They could silence every mention of what he had become. But they could not mend the fracture he left behind. Because the fracture was truth. Darth Krall had no master. No one trained him in the ways of the Sith. No one offered him a title. No holocron whispered the secrets of the rule of two. He was not chosen. He was not tested. He simply became. The Force had broken him open not in fury, but in silence. Not all at once, but slowly. Each betrayal, each unanswered plea, each corpse left behind on a battlefield that the Jedi refused to acknowledge. Pain was not a lesson. It was the only thing that answered back. So he listened. He studied the dark, not to conquer but to understand. Ancient Sith writings, forbidden Jedi scrolls, the lost thoughts of exiled masters and heretics too dangerous to name. What he found wasn't evil. It was honesty, it was hunger, and it matched the feeling he carried inside. But he didn't become a warlord. He never raised a Sith army, never sought to overthrow a council or seize a throne. Because Krall didn't want power. He wanted meaning. In solitude, he reached a place no Jedi had dared, a place no Sith had truly valued. He found clarity in suffering not as punishment, but as transformation. And without a master to shape his path, he became something new, something the orders could not explain. He was not a servant of the dark, he was a student of the wound. And in that wound, he found freedom. No lineage followed him. No apprentice survived him. But his Sithhood was no less real, because it was chosen, not offered, not inherited. Darth Krall did not come from tradition. He came from pain, and he gave that pain a voice the Force would never unhear. He was dead, but his ideas weren't. In the centuries that followed, the Jedi would speak of many fallen masters, those who turned, those who broke, those who simply vanished. But few were remembered without a name. Few were removed not only from the records, but from the memory of the Order itself. Darth Krall became one of them. The Jedi did not rebuild what he destroyed. They buried it, files were locked, reports sealed, survivors silenced. The mission that ended him was reclassified, and no one who came after was told what he had done or why he had done it. But the Force doesn't forget. There were Padawans who dreamed of a figure in armor, whispering things they didn't understand. There were masters who paused, unsettled, while meditating, sensing a presence that was no longer present. His voice was gone, But the wound he left in the Force still bled. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, others listened. Darth Plagueis would one day reference him in private, calling him a shadowed thought. A Sith who walked his own path. One who made no claims to a throne, no moves toward galactic conquest, but who still made the Jedi afraid. Because Krall proved something dangerous. That a lone mind, when severed from loyalty, freed from denial, and stripped of fear, could become its own power. His cult never rose again. His holocron was hidden, his name erased. But his philosophy survived in fragments. And sometimes, in the mind of a Sith who believed pain was a teacher, not a punishment. The Jedi burned his memory. But the Force remembered, because what Krall became could not be unmade.